For as long as human memory has reached back, stories have spoken of beings who did not belong entirely to this earth. They descended from the skies, luminous and powerful, shaping rivers, cities, and even the destinies of kings. To some, they were gods, to others teachers or architects, yet in every tradition, their presence marked the threshold between myth and history. What if these figures were not inventions of imagination, but reflections of something real? Fragments of memory carried forward in sacred texts, carved in stone, whispered in rituals beneath the stars. Across the deserts of Mesopotamia, the temples of Egypt, the mountains of India, and the jungles of Mesoamerica, the pattern repeats: an arrival, a gift of knowledge, a sudden withdrawal, and a promise to return. We walk among ruins that may not only be monuments to faith, but silent witnesses of contact with a greater order of intelligence. If the myths are not myths at all, then our past is stranger and far older than we have been told. Tonight, we open the door to that possibility and follow the trail left in myth, stone, and sky. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. Long before the modern world drew its borders and wrote its textbooks, there were stories whispered on clay tablets beneath the dust of Mesopotamia. Stories that claimed humanity itself was not born from chance, but from necessity. In the ancient land of Sumer, where the first cities rose like islands of light along the Tigris and Euphrates, scribes pressed cuneiform lines into wet clay, leaving us the earliest chronicles of gods who walked the earth. They called them the Anunnaki, a name that carried both reverence and fear, beings described as masters of heaven and earth, whose decisions shaped the fates of mortals. According to these texts, the Anunnaki were not solitary in their dominion. Beneath them labored another class of divine beings, the Igigi, who carried the weight of the work, digging canals, cultivating fields, tending the machinery of divine order. At first, this hierarchy seemed eternal, a reflection of cosmic law, but myths tell of the moment when the Igigi rebelled, their voices rising against unbearable toil. They burned their tools, abandoned their posts, and demanded relief. Faced with this crisis, the great gods gathered in council. Enlil, stern lord of wind and command, demanded punishment. Yet it was Enki, god of wisdom and water, who offered a different path. If the lesser gods refused labor, a new being would be made to bear it. The story that follows is strange, yet haunting in its detail. Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag are said to have shaped humanity from clay, but clay alone was not enough. To make a creature capable of service, they mixed the earth with the blood of a slain deity. In that mingling of soil and divinity, the first humans came into being. Not rulers, not free spirits, but workers designed to carry the burdens of the gods. This myth, older than empires, presents humanity not as the favored child of heaven, but as a utilitarian invention. What does it mean to imagine our origin not as an act of love, but as an act of engineering? Some scholars dismiss it as symbolic, yet the language of clay and blood has led others to suspect it masks something more concrete. An ancient attempt to explain the mingling of species, or even the manipulation of life by powers far beyond ordinary comprehension. The image of gods bending over damp clay is almost tender, but the purpose behind it is pragmatic. Humanity was made to fill the gap left by divine rebellion. Within these tales lies another tension, one that echoes across civilizations, the rivalry between Enki and Enlil. Enlil, often stern and unyielding, sought order above all, a world where humans remained obedient and limited. Enki, on the other hand, is remembered as a protector, a giver of forbidden knowledge, who defied his peers to grant humanity tools of survival. It was Enki who warned the sage Atrahasis of the coming flood, just as later traditions speak of Noah receiving a divine warning. And it was Enki who, like the serpent of Eden, urged humanity toward wisdom even at the cost of divine punishment. In this contest between authority and curiosity, we can glimpse the very struggle that defines human history. The desire for knowledge against the fear of losing control. The clay tablets do not offer tidy answers, only fragments. Yet in those fragments we recognize questions that still haunt us. The Anunnaki were not described as distant, ethereal spirits, but as beings with presence, form, and hierarchy. Anu, the Sky Father, presided from above, while Ki, the Earth Mother, rooted creation below. Their children, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Ninhursag, intervened directly in the affairs of the world. They were said to establish kingship, to teach crafts, to wage wars. And yet these gods did not remain forever. The texts suggest that after ages of mingling with humankind, they withdrew, leaving mortals to govern themselves. Some traditions even suggest that kingship descended from heaven, only to be handed down, as though authority itself was a gift transferred from a departing power. If taken literally, it hints at a moment when the guardians of civilization stepped aside, perhaps retreating into hidden realms, perhaps leaving this world altogether. But myth has a way of clinging to memory. The Sumerian king list, one of the strangest documents of antiquity, records rulers who reigned for thousands of years before the flood, their lifespans stretching far beyond human possibility. Were these numbers symbolic exaggerations, or echoes of a different kind of being, long-lived, powerful, yet still capable of walking beside men? The clay tablets preserve them without explanation, as if the scribes themselves were only recording what tradition demanded. For those who see in myth more than allegory, the king list becomes a chronicle of a forgotten epoch, a time when beings unlike us shaped the order of cities and then vanished into shadow. What is remarkable is not only the content of these tales, but their persistence. The Atrahasis poem, the Enuma Elish, and the Epic of Gilgamesh each repeat motifs that later reappear in distant lands. A divine rebellion, the crafting of mankind from mixed essence, the granting of knowledge, the flood that wipes away corruption. These are not isolated inventions, but recurring patterns stitched into the fabric of myth. It is as if civilizations separated by distance carried fragments of the same story, each in their own tongue. And if that is the case, then perhaps these tales are less about fantasy and more about memory, distorted by time but never extinguished. Imagine those early nights in Sumer when fires flickered along the canals and priests looked to the heavens. Above them stretched constellations that seemed alive, their movements traced by careful eyes. Below them lay temples of mud brick and stone, rising in ziggurats meant to bridge earth and sky. Within the sanctuaries, hymns were sung to beings who, according to legend, had once stood among them. Whether those figures were gods, ancestors, or visitors from beyond, the effect was the same. Humanity believed itself the creation of something higher, something both demanding and mysterious. That belief shaped their cities, their laws, their vision of destiny. And when we stand among the ruins today, we too are haunted by the possibility that the boundary between myth and history is thinner than we dare admit. In the heart of Mesopotamia, where the rivers carried both life and destruction, there lies a myth that goes deeper than the rebellion of the Igigi. It is the story of how blood and clay were joined, of how the first humans were formed in an act that feels less like divine inspiration and more like deliberate engineering. The Atrahasis poem, pressed into fragile tablets more than 3,500 years ago, tells of a council of gods facing a crisis. The Igigi had laid down their tools, refusing to dig the canals and tend the fertile earth. Faced with famine in the realms of men and exhaustion among the divine, Enki proposed a radical solution. Instead of returning the Igigi to chains, they would fashion a new race, one built from the very elements of the world and infused with a spark of the divine. The details are unsettling in their specificity. A god was chosen for sacrifice, his blood drained as essence. Ninhursag, the Great Mother, mixed that blood with the clay of the earth. From this strange fusion emerged the first prototype of humanity. Not born of chance, not born of divine affection, but manufactured to work. The clay tablets speak with chilling clarity. Humans were designed to serve, to carry the burden of labor, to ensure that the wheels of the cosmos continued to turn. Imagine that, our origin not as children of the divine, but as tools in the machinery of heaven. When read with modern eyes, the story feels uncannily like a memory of biological manipulation, as if the ancients were describing in metaphor something they only half understood: the mingling of genes, the creation of a hybrid life form. Another version, preserved in the Enuma Elish, echoes the same theme but with new imagery. After the god Marduk defeated the chaos dragon Tiamat and split her body to form the world, he faced the same dilemma. Who would tend the new creation? He decreed that humans would be formed from the blood of Kingu, the vanquished consort of Tiamat, mixed again with earth. Once more, humanity's beginning is written not as a blessing, but as the recycling of divine flesh into a workforce. The texts do not romanticize this process. They speak of sacrifice, of utility, of creation born from necessity. And yet, in their bluntness lies something extraordinary: the idea that mankind carries within itself both the dust of the ground and the spark of something beyond. The choice of materials is telling. Clay, the substance of earth itself, pliable and humble, becomes the body. Blood, vital and mysterious, becomes the spirit. To the ancients, blood was life. It was the force that carried breath and heat, the sacred fluid that linked mortals to the gods. By mingling the two, the myth says, the gods created beings both bound to the soil and touched by heaven. It is a vision that resonates even today, for we still speak of ourselves as creatures of earth, yet haunted by something greater, a restlessness that suggests we are more than dust. What is remarkable is how this motif recurs across cultures. In the Hebrew Genesis, Adam is shaped from Adamah, the clay of the ground, and animated by the breath of God. In Greek legend, Prometheus molds humans from earth and water, only to see them animated by divine fire. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the creator gods try first with mud, which collapses, then with wood, which lacks soul, before succeeding with maize. Everywhere, the story repeats. A simple substance of earth, mixed with something vital, becomes humanity. Was this a universal metaphor for our connection to the soil? Or does it echo a shared, deeper memory? For the Mesopotamians, the question was not whether man was free, but whether man could endure. The first humans were described as fragile, their lifespans short, their bodies weak. Some versions of the Atrahasis say the early prototypes failed, unable to survive the demands placed upon them. Enki had to refine the process, adjusting, correcting, until a form appeared that could both serve and multiply. To read these lines is to sense experimentation, as though the ancients imagined creation as trial and error rather than miracle. The gods were not infallible. They tinkered, they tested, they struggled until they achieved the result they desired. There is an unease in these myths, a feeling that humanity's birth was tainted with exploitation. We were made not to rule, but to labor. Yet within that subjugation lies the seed of defiance. For Enki, who sympathized with his creations, often undermined the harsher decrees of Enlil. He whispered forbidden knowledge, teaching humans crafts and wisdom that allowed them to grow beyond mere servitude. This tension, between being tools of the gods and becoming masters of ourselves, would shape the destiny of civilizations. Consider how this plays out in ritual. In Mesopotamian temples, priests offered food and incense not as worship, but as sustenance for the gods. Humanity's role was to maintain the cosmic household, feeding, serving, honoring. Yet, in time, kings emerged who claimed divine sanction, who ruled not as slaves, but as stewards of order. The very beings created to carry burdens had begun to carve empires, write laws, and build monuments that rivaled the heavens. Perhaps this is the great irony of the myth, that creatures born to serve would one day stand in judgment of their makers, turning the story of subjugation into one of ascent. When we look at these myths with modern eyes, we cannot help but hear the echo of scientific language: clay as genetic material, blood as DNA, sacrifice as the transfer of information. The ancients may not have known the terms, but they preserved the imagery. Was this their attempt to describe something they witnessed, something that felt less like ritual and more like procedure? Did they sense that their own existence was the product of design, not accident? These are questions we cannot answer, yet the persistence of the motif across cultures suggests that it touched something fundamental in the human psyche. At night, when the great cities of Ur and Uruk were still alive, torches flickered in the temples, and hymns rose to the Anunnaki. Farmers in the fields looked up at the stars, believing that their toil was part of a covenant older than memory. They were the children of clay and blood, caught between the earth beneath their feet and the sky above their heads. Whether the gods who shaped them were real beings, symbolic forces, or projections of fear and wonder, the effect was the same. Humanity saw itself as bound to powers greater than itself. That belief would not only define Mesopotamia, but ripple outward, carried along trade routes and through migrations, shaping the stories of distant lands. And so the image lingers, hands of gods pressing into soft clay, the crimson stain of sacrifice mixing into mud, and from it rising the fragile, restless figure of a human being. A creature designed for labor, yet destined for something more. A tool, yet a dreamer. Dust of the ground, blood of the divine. That paradox, written thousands of years ago, still haunts us today. There is a peculiar moment in the ancient records when the distance between heaven and earth seems to collapse, when the gods are no longer distant names, but physical rulers whose reigns are etched into the memory of kingship itself. In Mesopotamia, this is preserved in the Sumerian king list, a text that looks at first like a dry catalogue of rulers, yet upon closer reading becomes one of the strangest documents ever written. It describes a time when kingship descended from heaven, when divine rulers walked among mortals, guiding cities, setting laws, and establishing civilization. The list begins not with human names, but with figures whose reigns lasted thousands of years, lengths so vast that they defy belief. 10 kings are said to have ruled before the Great Flood, their combined reigns stretching tens of thousands of years. And then, suddenly, after the flood, lifespans shrink, kingship passes to mortals, and history as we know it begins. To the modern reader, these numbers sound impossible, the kind of exaggeration that belongs to myth rather than fact. Yet the document was not written as myth. It was written as record, inscribed on clay tablets by scribes who believed they were preserving truth. Why would they preserve reigns of 20,000 or 30,000 years if not to convey something extraordinary, even if they themselves did not understand it? Some suggest the numbers are symbolic, encoding astronomical cycles or ritual patterns. Others argue they might preserve memory of beings whose lifespans were genuinely beyond human measure. If the Anunnaki were real, if they were something more than imagined gods, then perhaps their longevity, their near immortality, was remembered in the only way the scribes could describe it: reigns that stretched into eternity. The image is haunting. Imagine a city like Eridu, the first city of Sumer, rising from the marshes with its temple at the center. At its head was not a fragile mortal, but a being regarded as divine, a king who might live for centuries, perhaps longer. His presence would blur the line between worship and governance, for to obey the king was to obey the gods themselves. These rulers were not merely intermediaries. They were embodiments of power, living proof that heaven's authority was seated on earth. This idea would echo throughout later civilizations. In Egypt, where the pharaoh was seen as Horus incarnate; in China, where the emperor ruled under the mandate of heaven; and in Mesoamerica, where divine kings traced their bloodlines to celestial beings. The concept of rulers as gods may have begun here, in the Fertile Crescent, when divine figures walked as kings. If the king list is to be believed, the flood was the dividing line. Before it, divine kings ruled directly. After it, human rulers inherited the mantle, shorter-lived, weaker, yet still claiming legitimacy through divine connection. This transition feels less like an ending and more like a withdrawal. It suggests a time when the gods stepped back, handing governance to mortals, but leaving behind the framework of kingship. Even in later dynasties, kings were careful to present themselves as chosen by the gods, descendants of divine blood, protectors of the cosmic order. It is as though humanity, once created to serve, had been promoted to caretaker, carrying the memory of a golden age when the gods themselves were present. But what does it mean that the earliest rulers lived thousands of years? Some scholars dismiss it as poetic license, exaggeration meant to glorify ancestors. Others note that similar claims appear elsewhere. In the Bible, patriarchs before the flood lived nearly 1,000 years. In Chinese chronicles, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors ruled for centuries. In Hindu tradition, beings of earlier ages enjoyed lifespans far longer than ours. Could it be that all these traditions are pointing to a forgotten truth? That there was once a time or a type of being whose existence stretched far beyond the limits of human biology? If so, then perhaps the memory of those beings was preserved in king lists, genealogies, and sacred texts, later interpreted as myth when the reality had long vanished. Archaeology has uncovered cities that match the names in the king list: Ur, Uruk, Kish, Lagash. These were not imaginary places. They were thriving centers of culture and power. In their temples, statues of gods were carried in processions, fed with offerings, adorned with jewels. To the people who lived there, the gods were not invisible abstractions. They were present in rituals, invoked in contracts, embedded in every aspect of law and society. And if certain rulers carried themselves as gods in human form, perhaps it was because they were seen as continuations of an earlier time when divine beings sat on thrones. The clay tablets record not just who ruled, but how long, as if the measure of divine presence was not in miracles but in sheer endurance. One might ask, what happened when these beings vanished? Did they die, retreat, or ascend? The texts are silent, but the silence itself speaks. There is no tale of great battles where the gods were slain, no stories of a final departure. Instead, there is a gap, a sudden shift from reigns of thousands of years to reigns of decades. It is as if the gods simply stepped aside, leaving mortals to carry on in their absence. Some interpretations suggest they withdrew into hidden realms, or perhaps returned to the stars from which they came. Others believe they remain among us, unseen, their influence subtle but enduring. For the people of Mesopotamia, the memory was enough. They continued to honor the Anunnaki in hymns and rituals, invoking their names long after their physical presence had faded. The idea of gods walking the earth is not unique to Mesopotamia. In Greek tradition, Zeus, Apollo, and Athena mingled with mortals, sometimes disguising themselves, sometimes ruling openly. In Egyptian belief, the first pharaohs were gods themselves, reigning before the age of men. In Mesoamerican lore, Quetzalcoatl and other deities arrived as teachers and rulers. Across cultures, the motif repeats. A time when gods were not distant but immediate, when the line between mortal and divine was blurred. Perhaps this is why so many myths look backward to a golden age. They are not longing for a utopia of imagination, but for a remembered epoch when beings greater than ourselves shaped the world directly. Standing among the ruins of Uruk today, one can imagine the city in its prime. Walls stretching for miles, temples rising high, and within them rulers who were regarded not as men, but as living gods. The air thick with incense, the chants of priests echoing against mud-brick walls, the ziggurat shimmering under the sun. To the people who lived there, this was not fantasy. It was the order of the cosmos made visible. And when the king list tells us that these rulers lived for thousands of years, perhaps it is not exaggeration, but testimony to a reality we can scarcely comprehend. So we are left with a tantalizing question. Were these long-lived rulers flesh and blood, or symbols of divine cycles? Were they human kings elevated into legend, or beings of another kind whose reigns were measured in centuries? The tablets do not answer. They only preserve the memory that before the flood, before history as we know it, the world was ruled by those who were not entirely human. And that memory, carved into clay and buried for millennia, still whispers to us across time. Once, the gods themselves were here. Far to the west of Mesopotamia, along the slow, eternal ribbon of the Nile, another civilization rose, vast and luminous, building monuments that still command awe thousands of years later. Egypt, land of pyramids and desert horizons, preserved in its sacred texts the memory of a primordial era called Zep Tepi, the first time. According to inscriptions carved in temple walls and whispered in the pyramid texts, this was no ordinary beginning. It was the dawn when the gods themselves walked the earth, shaping the land, setting laws, and ruling long before the line of mortal pharaohs began. For the Egyptians, Zep Tepi wasn't myth in the sense of mere imagination. It was sacred history, the bedrock upon which their entire conception of kingship and order was founded. In this first time, the world was said to be chaotic waters until the sun, god Atum-Ra, rose from the abyss, bringing light, land, and order. From him emerged a lineage of divine rulers: Shu, god of air; Tefnut, goddess of moisture; Geb the earth; Nut the sky; and onward through Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Horus. These were not remote abstractions, but living presences, deities who reigned on earth before retreating to the heavens. Egyptian tradition held that before mortal dynasties began, these divine kings ruled for thousands of years, echoing the strange, long reigns described in the Sumerian king list. Once again, we see the pattern: an age when divine beings held dominion, followed by a transition into human rule. What is striking is the way Egyptian art depicted these gods. They were shown as humanoid figures with the heads of falcons, jackals, or ibis, their forms both familiar and alien. Many carried elongated crowns, and in some depictions their skulls themselves seem stretched, hinting at proportions beyond ordinary humans. Was this purely symbolic, a way of showing divine attributes? Or did it reflect something literal, memories of beings whose appearance differed from our own? Some pharaohs, like Akhenaten, were portrayed with unusually long heads and slender bodies, their statues so different from traditional human forms that they have fueled endless speculation. Were these artistic choices deliberate attempts to echo the gods of Zep Tepi, or did they hint at a bloodline that carried something more than human? For the Egyptians, kingship was never a simple political office. To wear the crown was to embody divine essence, to become Horus in life and Osiris in death. Unlike Mesopotamian rulers who governed on behalf of the gods, the pharaohs of Egypt were gods themselves, living incarnations of the Netru, the divine order. This belief was not metaphorical, but literal, shaping rituals, laws, and the architecture of power. To disobey the pharaoh was to disrupt the harmony of the cosmos, for he was the mediator between earth and heaven. Such a conception did not arise from nowhere. It was inherited from the memory of Zep Tepi, when gods had once walked the Nile and ruled directly. The pharaoh was their continuation, their descendant, their earthly vessel. The temples and pyramids stand as echoes of this belief. The pyramid texts, inscribed in the burial chambers of kings, speak of journeys into the sky, of pharaohs ascending to join the imperishable stars, of doors opening in the heavens. They describe not just spiritual ascent, but what sounds like literal passage, the ruler carried into the realm of the gods. At times, the language feels eerily close to descriptions of travel through the sky, as if these structures were more than tombs, perhaps gateways or markers of connection between worlds. The Great Pyramid itself, aligned with uncanny precision to the cardinal points and to the stars of Orion, seems less like a funerary monument and more like a device, whether symbolic or functional, linking Earth to the cosmos. Consider the legend of Osiris, the god who ruled Egypt before being slain and dismembered by his brother Seth, only to be resurrected by Isis and to reign as lord of the underworld. In the myth, his son Horus avenges him and takes the throne, establishing the line of kings that continued into mortal history. Osiris is not presented as an untouchable figure beyond time. He is a ruler who lives, dies, and rules again, bridging the gap between divine and human. In the story of Isis gathering his fragments and breathing life back into him, we hear not only a tale of love and loss, but perhaps a memory of knowledge lost and regained, of technologies or powers that seemed to defy mortality. The Egyptian vision of Zep Tepi also included great works of architecture and wisdom said to have been bestowed by the gods. Some traditions spoke of the god Thoth, lord of writing and knowledge, as the one who gave humanity language, mathematics, and the secrets of the heavens. Others credited him with the building of the pyramids, or with preserving records from an even earlier, now vanished civilization. In later Hellenistic times, Thoth would be equated with Hermes Trismegistus, keeper of occult wisdom, a figure whose teachings would influence alchemists, philosophers, and mystics for centuries. Once again, we encounter the pattern of divine beings as bringers of knowledge, and the lingering suspicion that their wisdom was far more advanced than the era should have allowed. What makes Zep Tepi compelling is how central it remained to Egyptian identity. It was not a myth tucked away in obscure texts. It was carved into the walls of temples, spoken in daily rituals, encoded into the very structure of kingship. When a new pharaoh ascended the throne, he was not beginning something new. He was restoring the order that had been established in the first time. Every coronation was an echo of that divine moment, a reenactment of the god's rule on earth. And when the pharaoh died, he was said to return to join the eternal gods, his soul sailing the celestial river, his body placed in monuments aligned to the stars. Standing before the massive statues of Luxor or gazing up at the Sphinx, one cannot help but feel the weight of this memory. These were not simply works of stone and engineering. They were attempts to preserve connection with the first time, to keep alive the thread between humanity and the beings who had once walked among them. Whether those beings were gods, ancestors, or something we might now call extraterrestrial, the effect was the same. The Egyptians believed their civilization was founded not by men, but by those who came before, those who possessed power and wisdom beyond comprehension. Modern archaeology tells us that Egypt's greatness was the product of human ingenuity, labor, and adaptation to the cycles of the Nile. And yet the myths remain, insistent, refusing to vanish. They whisper of a lost era, a golden age when gods ruled as kings, when knowledge flowed freely, and when monuments were raised not merely to honor the dead, but to serve as bridges to the stars. Whether symbolic or real, Zep Tepi endures as a question mark in history. Was it only myth, or was it the faint memory of a time when the boundary between the human and the divine was not yet drawn? The pyramids of Egypt rise from the desert like frozen thunder, monuments so vast and precise that even after millennia they seem beyond the reach of mortal hands. To the modern visitor, the Great Pyramid of Giza looms as a silent enigma, its blocks stacked with geometric perfection, its base aligned almost flawlessly with the cardinal directions, its proportions reflecting mathematical constants that would not be formally defined until thousands of years later. Official history tells us these were tombs, grand sepulchres for pharaohs who wished to preserve their glory into eternity. Yet to stand before them, to trace the sharp edges of stones weighing more than 2 tons apiece, to see how their placement defies error across acres of desert plateau, is to feel that these structures may have served a purpose far greater than funerary ritual. The mainstream view insists on human labor, tens of thousands of workers, decades of toil, copper tools grinding against limestone, ropes and sledges dragging immense blocks across the sands. Yet alternative theories have long whispered a different possibility. Could these monuments have been built with knowledge not of their time, knowledge imparted from an earlier age or from beings beyond human origin? The question lingers because the pyramids do not behave like ordinary tombs. Unlike later royal burials, they contain no lavish inscriptions, no detailed hieroglyphs recounting the deeds of the king. The Great Pyramid in particular is eerily silent inside, its chambers bare, its walls smooth, as if designed not for ceremony but for function. Some researchers have pointed to the choice of materials as suggestive. The pyramid incorporates limestone casing stones, granite in its inner chambers, and traces of quartz, materials known for their conductive properties. Could the combination have been deliberate, forming a structure capable of channeling or amplifying energy? The notion seems fantastical, yet experiments with models have shown strange electromagnetic effects within its passages. If true, then the Great Pyramid may have been less a tomb and more a machine, an immense device that harnessed natural forces in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. Legends from later ages even speak of pyramids as sources of light, or as repositories of secret knowledge hidden in stone. The alignment of the pyramids adds to the mystery. The 3 Great Pyramids of Giza form a pattern that mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, as if designed as part of a celestial map. At certain times of the year, shafts within the Great Pyramid point directly toward key stars such as Sirius and Orion. To the ancient Egyptians, these were not just points of light but gateways, homes of gods and destinations of souls. The pharaoh's passage into the afterlife was imagined as a journey to the imperishable stars, and the pyramid, aligned with cosmic precision, became the vessel for that voyage. Was it symbolic architecture meant to guide the soul? Or was it something more? A physical beacon, a kind of signal to the heavens? Consider the sheer logistics. Each block of the Great Pyramid averages 2.5 tons, some weighing over 70 tons, and more than 2 million of them were set into place with joints so fine that a blade cannot fit between. How could this have been achieved with primitive tools and manpower alone? Mainstream archaeology answers with ramps and relentless labor. But alternative thinkers argue that the difficulty is not just in moving the stones, but in aligning them, in setting them with such precision over such a vast structure. To accomplish this requires knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering that seems to belong to an era far advanced for the 3rd millennium BC. Legends suggest that the Neteru themselves, the divine beings of Zep Tepi, may have imparted this knowledge. Some inscriptions speak of gods teaching architecture, of wisdom handed down from the stars. Later traditions even claim that the pyramids were built to preserve knowledge from a coming flood, a vault of wisdom meant to outlast catastrophe. If true, then the pyramids were not merely tombs, but time capsules, deliberately constructed to carry memory across ages of destruction. And what of the Sphinx, crouched beside them, its body worn by water erosion that some geologists argue predates the dynasties of Egypt by thousands of years? If the Sphinx truly bears the marks of rainfall from a wetter age, then it may have been carved in an epoch when the Sahara was green, long before the official rise of pharaonic civilization. If so, the Sphinx and the pyramids may not be creations of the Old Kingdom alone, but inheritances from an earlier, forgotten time, echoes of a civilization that reached its height before being swallowed by the sands. Inside the Great Pyramid, the strangeness deepens. The so-called King's Chamber, with its granite sarcophagus, shows no signs of having held a body. Its acoustics, however, are extraordinary. A low hum resonates through its stone, amplifying sound in ways that feel intentional. The passageways leading to it are narrow and precise, some angled to align with stars. Some researchers have suggested that the structure may have been designed to interact with vibration, resonance, even light itself. If this is true, then the pyramid is not a tomb, but an instrument on a scale so vast that its purpose escapes us. Egyptian texts refer to the pyramids as places of ascension, stairways to the gods. In that sense, whether they were machines, tombs, or something in between, their function was to bridge worlds. They stood as the central symbols of Egyptian civilization, embodiments of the idea that death was not an end but a passage, that the soul could rise from earth to join the stars. Perhaps the technology of their construction, whether lost or mythical, was itself part of that message. To demonstrate that humanity, with or without divine aid, could build structures that defy time, monuments that outlast empires. Standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, one cannot help but feel its silent gaze. Its stones do not answer questions, yet they pose them relentlessly. Were these monuments the culmination of human determination, or were they the legacy of something greater, the remnants of knowledge from a forgotten age when gods and men built together? Tomb or machine, symbol or technology, the pyramids continue to speak across the desert winds, reminding us that some mysteries are too vast to be buried. Across the mountains and river plains of India, in a land where the Ganges flows like a sacred artery, myths were preserved not only as stories, but as sprawling epics, recited for centuries before being written down. Among them, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana stand as vast tapestries of gods, kings, and cosmic battles. Within their verses, we find a motif familiar from Mesopotamia and Egypt. Beings who descend from the heavens, divide themselves into rival factions, and shape the destiny of humanity. In India, they were called the Devas and the Asuras. To later Hindu tradition, The Devas became gods and the Asuras demons, forces of light opposed to darkness. Yet the earliest Vedic hymns paint a more complex picture. Both groups were powerful, luminous, and divine. Both sought dominion over heaven and earth. Their conflict was not simply moral, but political, a struggle between rival houses of the cosmos. The Devas, the Shining Ones, were associated with wisdom, order, and balance. They upheld Dharma, the cosmic law that sustains life and harmony. Indra, king of the Devas, wielded the thunderbolt against chaos. Agni, the fire, carried offerings to the gods. Surya shone as the sun. Vishnu preserved life, and Varuna upheld the order of waters and skies. The Asuras, in contrast, were proud and ambitious, often challenging the authority of the Devas. In some hymns they are not demonic at all, but simply another clan of divine beings, rivals whose rebellion mirrors the Igigi of Mesopotamian myth. Only in later retellings did they take on the role of demons, cast down for their defiance. But even in their rebellion, they seem more like displaced rulers than embodiments of evil, beings who once shared in the governance of heaven before being rebranded as adversaries. The battles between these factions were described not as mere allegories, but as wars fought with weapons of astonishing power. The texts speak of astras, divine armaments summoned with mantras, weapons that shone like suns, that could level armies and incinerate cities. Among the most vivid descriptions are those of the Brahmastra, said to blaze brighter than 10,000 suns, leaving wastelands poisoned and lifeless. The imagery is hauntingly modern, resembling accounts of nuclear devastation. Survivors lose hair and nails, rivers are poisoned, lands become barren. Could these be metaphors for natural disasters? Or are they distorted memories of warfare fought with weapons beyond the technology of their time? Even more enigmatic are the descriptions of Vimanas, the flying vehicles of gods and kings. In the Ramayana, Rama's enemy Ravana commands a great aerial chariot called Pushpaka Vimana, which can travel anywhere at will. The Mahabharata describes Vimanas as multi-tiered, radiant machines, able to soar to great heights, maneuver swiftly, and even cross into other realms. Later texts, like the Vaimanika Shastra, a Sanskrit manuscript rediscovered in the early 20th century, provide detailed accounts of Vimanas, their propulsion, and their construction. It speaks of engines powered by quicksilver, of anti-gravity mechanisms, of pilots trained in complex controls. Scholars debate the text's origins, many calling it a modern forgery. Yet the imagery it contains mirrors the descriptions found in much older epics, where Vimanas are not metaphors, but practical crafts of war and transport. What is striking is the variety of Vimanas. Some are described as small and agile, darting across battlefields. Others are vast, like flying palaces adorned with golden domes, carrying whole retinues of warriors. They can ascend to the sun, descend to earth, even traverse between realms of gods and mortals. In some accounts, they release missiles, beams of light, or fiery projectiles. To the people of ancient India, these were not abstractions, but literal machines of the gods. The very word Vimana means measured out, or having been traversed, hinting at engineering and precision. If we strip away the lens of mythology, what remains reads uncannily like descriptions of aerial vehicles, technology that should not exist in the distant past, yet appears again and again in these ancient texts. In the Great War of the Mahabharata, Vimanas fill the sky as celestial chariots, carrying heroes and gods alike. Their battles echo across heaven and earth, with weapons that scorch, blind, and annihilate. Arjuna, guided by Krishna, unleashes astras that darken the sun, while his enemies retaliate with arms that shatter mountains. These passages, whether allegorical or not, carry a visceral quality, as though they were recounting events witnessed rather than imagined. Archaeological studies at sites like Mohenjo-Daro have uncovered evidence of sudden destruction, skeletons lying in the streets, traces of vitrification in stone, signs of intense heat. While mainstream archaeology attributes this to fires or natural disaster, some see in it the shadow of ancient war, devastation on a scale that recalls the fiery astras of the epic. At the heart of Hindu cosmology lies the Trimurti, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. Together they govern the cycles of birth, life, and death. Their roles mirror natural forces, yet to some they represent not only cosmic principles, but living powers who once walked the earth. Shiva, with his third eye that unleashes destruction, has been likened to an energy weapon capable of leveling worlds. Vishnu, who descends in avatars to restore balance in times of crisis, recalls the motif of gods intervening when humanity falters, guiding civilizations back to order. Brahma, who fashions life, may symbolize creation through knowledge, perhaps even the manipulation of life itself, as seen in the Mesopotamian myths of clay and blood. These gods, whether symbolic or literal, embody the same archetype found across cultures, beings with power over creation, knowledge, and destruction, whose actions echo in human destiny. But beyond warfare and cosmic drama, there is something deeply human in these stories. The gods are not remote, untouchable forces. They love, betray, protect, and punish. They take sides in human affairs, mentor chosen heroes, and curse their enemies. The boundary between divine and mortal is porous. Kings claim descent from gods, warriors wield weapons gifted by them, and sometimes gods themselves are born into human form. The epics suggest not a world of separation, but of intimacy, a time when the divine was entangled with the human, shaping history in ways both wondrous and terrifying. Standing before the ruins of ancient India, the massive baths of Mohenjo-Daro, the mysterious seals of the Indus Valley, the great temples rising in later ages, it is tempting to dismiss the Vimanas and Astras as imagination, poetic metaphors for storms or cosmic truths. Yet the detail, the persistence, and the parallels with myths elsewhere leave us uneasy. Why do so many cultures speak of gods arriving from the sky in machines of fire? Why do they describe weapons of light and destruction that seem centuries out of place? And why do they so often frame human destiny as the byproduct of rivalries among these celestial beings? Perhaps the Vimanas were never machines at all, but visions of shamans, metaphors for altered states of consciousness. Or perhaps they were real, the remembered crafts of beings who visited long before recorded history, their presence woven into myth because myth was the only language available. Whatever the truth, the stories endure. In the thunder of Indra's bolt, in the shining chariots of the epics, in the voice of Krishna guiding Arjuna on the battlefield, there lingers the memory of a time when the sky was filled with more than clouds, when battles of gods and mortals lit the horizon, and when the destiny of mankind was written not only in soil and blood, but in the fire of the heavens. In the long verses of the Mahabharata, war is not described as a clash of swords and shields alone, but as an upheaval that shook the earth and scarred the sky. The Kurukshetra battlefield becomes a stage where men and gods unleash forces that sound uncannily like weapons of an age far more advanced than the one historians assign to the epic. Arrows tipped with fire consume entire divisions. Projectiles streak across the heavens, blinding warriors with their brilliance. Astras, divine weapons invoked by mantra, descend with explosions that shake the ground. Among them, the Brahmastra stands out, described as a weapon so powerful that the earth shook, the oceans boiled, and the sun shone with the brightness of 10,000 suns. When unleashed, it scorched the battlefield, reduced cities to ash, and poisoned the land so that nothing could grow. Survivors were said to have lost their hair and nails, their skin burning from within, a description that chills modern readers who recognize in it the symptoms of radiation exposure. For centuries, these tales were dismissed as poetic metaphor, a way of dramatizing the horrors of war. Yet the details are strangely consistent. They speak of mushrooming clouds, of winds that carried death, of rivers turned black and unfit to drink. Such descriptions do not sound like metaphor for spears or clubs. They sound like eyewitness accounts of devastation on a scale beyond ordinary warfare. Could the Mahabharata be preserving a memory of some lost technology? A glimpse of weapons whose power rivals those of the modern atomic age? The question deepens when we turn to the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the principal cities of the Indus Valley civilization. When archaeologists first excavated its streets, they found skeletons lying as though struck down suddenly, their bodies twisted in poses of terror. The city showed no signs of gradual decline, no evidence of long siege or famine, but instead suggested abrupt destruction. Even more puzzling were patches of stone that appeared vitrified, fused as if subjected to intense heat. In some cases, the levels of radiation measured in the area were reported to be higher than normal, though such claims remain controversial. Whether exaggerated or not, the imagery of a once thriving city reduced to silence by overwhelming force echoes too strongly with the descriptions in the epic to be ignored. Mainstream archaeology explains Mohenjo-Daro's fall through more mundane causes: invasion, climate change, shifts in the river that sustained it. Yet the unsettling parallels remain. A city abandoned suddenly, its inhabitants struck down, its remains carrying whispers of fire that melted stone. The Mahabharata speaks of cities incinerated by astras. The ruins of the Indus Valley show signs of abrupt calamity. Between text and excavation lies a question that refuses to vanish. Were the ancients only imagining, or were they remembering? Even within the Mahabharata itself, there is recognition of the danger posed by such weapons. Warriors are cautioned against using them indiscriminately, for they could annihilate friend and foe alike. Arjuna, the hero guided by Krishna, is told to restrain the Brahmastra, for its deployment could devastate the world. The cautionary tone is striking, echoing the modern anxieties of nuclear proliferation. It suggests that even within the myth, there was awareness of power too great for mortal hands, knowledge that had to be withheld, passed only to those deemed worthy. The resonance with Mesopotamian myths of forbidden knowledge or with the watchers in the Book of Enoch who taught men secret arts, is unmistakable. Across cultures, we find the same theme: the gift of powerful knowledge, the temptation to use it, and the devastation that follows. The wars of the Mahabharata were not only fought with weapons of fire, but also with machines of the sky. Vimanas crisscross the battlefield, launching projectiles, maneuvering through the air like crafts in a theater of destruction. The text describes them diving and soaring, releasing beams of light and showers of fire. The imagery suggests aerial combat, an element of warfare we do not expect in ancient epics. If one reads with skeptical eyes, it is all metaphor. But if one entertains the possibility of memory, then perhaps these passages describe something witnessed long ago, when battles of gods and men involved technology indistinguishable from magic. To the people of ancient India, these stories were not myths in the modern sense. They were itihasa, sacred history. Thus it happened. They were recited not as allegory, but as record, part of the cultural memory of a civilization that believed its ancestors lived in the shadow of gods and cosmic wars. The persistence of these stories across centuries, their detail and consistency, makes them difficult to dismiss as invention alone. And when we place them beside the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, the coincidence sharpens. A city destroyed suddenly, skeletons in the streets, echoes of heat and fire, an epic describing weapons that scorch, blind, and poison. The two converge like halves of a forgotten story. What lingers most is the sense of cycles. Hindu cosmology teaches of yugas, great ages that rise and fall in succession. Each age begins in order and ends in decline, often with destruction that clears the way for renewal. The battles of the Mahabharata take place at the end of the Dvapara Yuga, just before the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness in which we now live. In this view, destruction is not anomaly, but inevitability, a pattern that repeats as civilizations rise, flourish, and fall. If the Astras and Vimanas were real, then perhaps they were remnants of technologies from a prior age, brought into ours and lost again in the catastrophe that followed. Standing on the dry mound of Mohenjo-Daro today, among the ruins of streets and granaries, one feels both the silence and the weight of history. The walls whisper of a city that thrived for centuries, organized and sophisticated, only to vanish in an instant. The epic whispers of wars fought with fire brighter than suns, weapons that poisoned the land. Between them hangs the same uneasy question: did humanity once wield power far beyond what we believe possible? And if so, was that power our gift from the gods, or the cause of our own undoing? The Mahabharata does not resolve the tension. It ends with victory and ruin, with kingdoms reduced, with families destroyed, with survivors haunted by what they have unleashed. It offers not triumph, but caution, a reminder that the pursuit of power carries costs that echo through ages. Perhaps that is why the story endured, because it carried the memory not only of war, but of warning. In its verses, the past speaks to the present. Remember, for once we held fire too great to master, and it consumed us. Among the texts that never entered the canon of Scripture, yet persisted in whispers and fragments, is the Book of Enoch, a work so unsettling that it was hidden for centuries, preserved only in Ethiopian monasteries before resurfacing in modern times. It tells a story parallel to Genesis, but darker, more vivid, a tale of beings who descended from the heavens not to bless, but to transgress. These were the Watchers, angels set to observe humanity, who instead chose to intervene, crossing a boundary that heaven had drawn. They took wives from among the daughters of men, and from those unions came the Nephilim, giants of old, mighty beings whose presence shook the earth. The tale begins with descent. The Watchers, led by Semjaza and Azazel, looked upon the beauty of human women and swore an oath to bind themselves together in rebellion. On Mount Hermon, they pledged to abandon their station and mingle with mortals. What followed was not simply the birth of giants, but the transfer of forbidden knowledge. The Watchers taught men the arts of metallurgy, fashioning weapons from iron and ornaments from gold. They taught women the arts of adornment, enchantment, and hidden charms. They revealed the secrets of the stars, the courses of the moon, the signs of the heavens. In short, they gave humanity the tools of power, tools not meant for their hands. The result was corruption. The Nephilim, vast and violent, consumed the earth, devouring animals, crops, and eventually men themselves. Blood stained the land, and cries of the oppressed reached heaven. Humanity, created fragile, had been armed with knowledge too great, and the balance was broken. God, seeing the corruption, decreed judgment. The archangels were sent to bind the Watchers in chains beneath the earth, to hurl them into darkness until the final judgment. The Nephilim, their bodies destroyed, were said to leave behind restless spirits, wandering demons that still haunt the earth. And upon humanity came the flood, a cleansing to wash away the hybrid offspring and the knowledge that had tipped the world into ruin. It is a story both mythic and strangely specific. The details of metallurgy, cosmetics, astronomy, and sorcery feel like more than allegory. They resemble the sudden leaps in technology and culture that appear in the archaeological record, moments when human societies surged forward as if knowledge had arrived fully formed. Could the Watchers be a memory of such a leap, remembered not as progress but as transgression? The image of beings descending from the heavens to mingle with mortals echoes the Mesopotamian Apkallu, sages who brought wisdom, and the Greek tales of titans who defied Olympus. Once again, the pattern emerges. Divine beings cross boundaries, grant forbidden knowledge, and unleash consequences beyond control. The Nephilim themselves occupy a shadowy place in memory. Genesis refers to them briefly as giants, men of renown, but the Book of Enoch expands them into terrifying presences. Their size, their appetite, their violence set them apart. Later, Jewish and Christian traditions spoke of them as monstrous, a race not meant to exist. Yet in folklore across the world, tales of giants persist, builders of megaliths, guardians of mountains, ancestors of vanished tribes. From the Cyclops of Greece to the Jotnar of Norse myth, from the giants of Celtic lore to the stone figures of Easter Island, the motif repeats. Could the Nephilim be part of a global memory of beings larger and stranger than humans, remnants of a time erased by flood and fire? The punishment of the Watchers resonates with themes found elsewhere. Like Prometheus bound for stealing fire, they are cast into darkness for sharing forbidden gifts. Like the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, they are chained beneath the earth, their voices silenced. The parallel suggests a shared archetype, a memory that transcends culture, the fall of divine rebels who gave humanity what heaven forbade. their legacy is ambivalent. On one hand, they brought knowledge, astronomy, metalwork, enchantment, without which civilizations would not have flourished. On the other, they brought violence and chaos, the destruction of balance, the unleashing of giants who consumed the world. The flood that follows in the Book of Enoch is no mere natural disaster. It is a deliberate act of erasure, a cosmic reset meant to wipe away the corruption of the Nephilim. In this light, the flood myths of Mesopotamia, the Bible, and countless other cultures take on a new resonance. They are not simply stories of divine wrath, but memories of a cleansing designed to remove a hybrid race and the dangerous knowledge it carried. Humanity, fragile but untainted, would survive through a chosen remnant, Noah, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, while the giants perished. But if the Nephilim's bodies were destroyed, their spirits lingered, restless, vengeful, corrupting. Thus, even after the flood, echoes of their presence haunted the world. What is most striking about the Book of Enoch is its perspective. It does not present the watchers as abstract symbols, but as beings with names, desires, and deeds. It portrays them as tangible figures whose actions had consequences written in blood and fire. It suggests that the boundary between heaven and earth was once porous, that beings from above mingled freely until they were punished. This idea reverberates in later traditions: fallen angels in Christianity, jinn in Islam, spirits cast down from the heavens. Always the story is the same. Beings of power crossed into the human world, brought knowledge and chaos, and were exiled. In a way, the Book of Enoch reframes human history. It implies that what we call progress, metal, magic, astronomy, was not our own achievement, but a gift stolen from higher realms. It suggests that the disasters which followed, the flood, the fall of civilizations, were consequences of knowledge gained too soon. Whether one sees this as myth or memory, the caution is clear. Knowledge without wisdom destroys. Power without restraint corrupts. The giants of old stand as warnings, their shadows stretching into our age. When fragments of the Book of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars realized its influence had been wider than once thought. Early Christians knew it, quoted it, debated it. Even the New Testament letter of Jude cites it directly, speaking of angels who kept not their first estate. For centuries it was suppressed, perhaps because its vision was too strange, too unsettling. Yet its survival in Ethiopia kept the story alive, a thread of memory too stubborn to vanish. Standing at Mount Hermon, where legend says the Watchers descended, one sees a barren summit touched by snow, a place that feels like a threshold. The imagination fills with visions of figures descending in fire, swearing oaths, giving away secrets. The mountain itself becomes a monument to transgression, a reminder of a time when heaven's watchers became earth's corruptors. Whether literal or symbolic, the story endures because it touches something deep: the fear and fascination of humanity's encounter with knowledge that exceeds its grasp. The Watchers fell, the Nephilim perished, and the flood swept clean the earth. Yet the memory remains, in scripture, in folklore, in the ruins of megaliths and the whispers of giants. It is the same memory that recurs across cultures: beings from the sky, gifts of knowledge, a hybrid race, a catastrophic purge. Perhaps it is only myth, shaped to explain the unknown. Or perhaps it is the faint echo of history, a history in which gods and mortals once mingled too closely, and the price of that mingling was nearly the end of the world. Flood stories ripple across the memory of the world like echoes of one overwhelming tide. In Mesopotamia, the clay tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh tell of Utnapishtim, warned by the god Ea to build a great boat and preserve life before waters consumed the land. In the Atrahasis poem, it is Enki who whispers to a man through a reed wall, warning him of Enlil's plan to drown humanity. In Genesis, Noah receives the same warning, building an ark to save his family and the animals of the earth. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh speaks of floods sent to sweep away earlier races of men, beings of wood who lacked souls. In each culture, the story differs in detail but shares the same rhythm. Corruption spreads, a warning comes, waters rise, the world is cleansed, and a remnant survives to begin again. The question that lingers is why? Was the flood remembered simply as punishment for human sin, a moral cleansing? Or was it something more precise, a targeted erasure of a hybrid race, the Nephilim, the giants born of forbidden unions, the offspring of gods and mortals who upset the balance of creation? The Book of Enoch is explicit. The flood was not only for humanity, but to destroy the children of the Watchers. Their violence, their appetite, their arrogance threatened to consume the world. The only remedy was annihilation. In this light, the flood ceases to be random wrath and becomes deliberate surgery, an act of cosmic control to reset creation. Mesopotamian texts portray the gods themselves as divided. Enlil, enraged by humanity's noise and rebellion, demanded extermination. Enki, sympathetic to men, sought to preserve a remnant. The tension between them mirrors the larger theme: authority seeking to erase, wisdom seeking to save. Humanity, fragile and caught between, survived only because of a whisper, a secret warning, a hidden act of defiance. In this pattern, we glimpse again the archetype of protector gods and punisher gods, a struggle that defines much of mythic history. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim recounts the terror of the flood. The storm came, the flood came, it overwhelmed the people like locusts. The imagery is visceral: black clouds, lightning, the roar of the deep, walls of water obliterating cities. When the storm ceased, silence reigned. The survivors stepped out into a world scrubbed bare, corpses floating like driftwood. In the Bible, Noah releases a dove to find land, echoing Utnapishtim's bird that does not return. These parallels are too precise to ignore. They suggest not invention, but shared memory, a trauma engraved into the human psyche and carried across continents. In the Popol Vuh, the flood is not simply water, but resin from the sky, a strange rain that burns as it falls, dissolving the race of men made of wood. Some scholars see here volcanic imagery, others cosmic fire, but the symbolism is strikingly similar. Destruction from above, followed by deluge. The surviving gods then create a new humanity from maize, a race more balanced, capable of reverence. Once again, the theme is clear. Flawed creations are erased, replaced by beings more suited to divine intention. Geology lends its own voice to the myth. Around the end of the Ice Age, roughly 12,000 years ago, the planet experienced sudden floods as glaciers melted and seas surged. The Black Sea may have expanded catastrophically, drowning fertile valleys. In North America, the Missoula floods swept across the land, carving channels in days. In the Middle East, ancient river civilizations may have seen waters rise abruptly, drowning fields and villages. These events, stitched into collective memory, could have inspired the flood myths. Yet the global consistency, the idea of divine warning, a chosen survivor, a deliberate cleansing, suggests something deeper than natural disaster alone. What is most haunting is the sense of erasure. The flood is remembered not only as a calamity, but as the end of an age, the wiping out of an entire generation. The long reigns of the Sumerian kings before the flood vanish, replaced by shorter spans. The watchers and their children are gone. The Zep Tepi of Egypt recedes into myth. The great civilizations that may have flourished before are remembered only in fragments, drowned beneath layers of silt. If the flood was a real event, then it was not only water but a veil, drowning not only lands but memories, leaving humanity with a sense of loss it cannot articulate. For the survivors, the flood became the dividing line of time. Before it, gods and giants walked the earth. After it, men ruled alone, yet always haunted by the echo of what had been erased. The covenant with Noah, the promise that the world would not again be destroyed by water, speaks to that trauma. It is the assurance of stability after chaos, the rainbow as a sign of restraint. But behind it lies the warning. The flood was not random. It was judgment, an intervention, a deliberate act of cleansing. If such intervention happened once, could it happen again? Standing by the ruins of Ur, or gazing at the terraces of the Andes where flood myths also endure, one feels the scope of this memory. Entire cultures, separated by oceans, preserved the same story. Humanity nearly perished, but a few were saved, carried across the waters by divine instruction. Whether one interprets this as myth, born from common experience of natural disaster, or as the echo of a single great event that reshaped the world, the persistence is undeniable. It is as though the flood is carved into the bedrock of human identity, a reminder that civilizations, no matter how mighty, can vanish in a heartbeat. The Book of Enoch frames the flood not only as punishment, but as the end of contamination. The purging of knowledge humanity was not meant to wield. If that is true, then the myths are also warnings. Progress without wisdom courts destruction, and those who play with forbidden power invite annihilation. The ancients may not have spoken of radiation or genetic manipulation, but they understood the cost of knowledge too great for fragile hands. Their solution was drastic, a flood to wash it all away. When we hear these stories today, they stir something primal. Perhaps we sense that the flood is not only past but future, that cycles of rise and ruin continue, that water or fire may again reset the world. The myths remind us that survival is fragile, dependent on balance, and that arrogance, whether of gods, giants, or men, always draws the tide. When the waters of the flood receded, when the last cries of giants faded into the soil and the remnant of humanity stepped once more onto dry ground, something fundamental had changed. The myths tell us that the world did not merely lose cities or crops. It lost the visible presence of its gods. Before the deluge, they walked openly among mortals. They reigned as kings, taught skills, enforced laws, and intermarried with humankind. Afterward, their presence is muted, refracted through priests, idols, visions, and dreams. The transition is stark. An age of intimacy ends, and an age of distance begins. One cannot help but wonder, where did they go? The Mesopotamian texts imply withdrawal. The Anunnaki, once active, retreat to the heavens or descend into the depths, leaving mortals to govern themselves. Enlil and Enki remain as names in hymns, invoked but unseen. In Egypt, the first time, Zep Tepi ends, and the divine rulers vanish into myth, leaving pharaohs to act as their earthly stand-ins. The Sumerian king list makes the break explicit. Before the flood, kings reigned for thousands of years. After, lifespans contract, and kingship passes firmly into human hands. The world becomes smaller, mortal, bounded by time. In the Hebrew tradition, the aftermath of the flood is equally marked by absence. The Nephilim, the children of the Watchers, are gone, their memory lingering only in vague references to giants that survived at the margins. The Watchers themselves are chained in darkness, their rebellion punished, their voices silenced. Humanity is now alone with God, without the dangerous mediation of angelic transgressors. Where once the earth was crowded with beings of mixed nature, now the line between heaven and earth is policed with severity. The silence that follows feels deliberate, as though a veil has been drawn. Yet the disappearance of the gods is never complete. In every culture, fragments remain, whispers of hidden enclaves, promises of return. The Greeks remembered the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, yet still alive, their power latent. The Maya told of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who departed across the sea with a promise to come back. The Hopi speak of Kachinas, star beings who withdrew but continue to watch, returning in visions and prophecies. The Egyptians wrote of Osiris ruling in the underworld, Horus reigning as a mortal king, Isis wandering in grief. The gods may have retreated, but they had not vanished entirely. They lingered at the edges of time, shaping the unseen while leaving humanity to stumble forward. What is most striking is the change in tone. Before the flood, myths are filled with detail. The gods building, warring, mating, instructing. Afterward, they become remote, their interventions rarer, their presence symbolic rather than physical. It is as though a door closed. Some traditions suggest they departed to the stars, returning to the celestial homes from which they came. Others say they went underground, into hidden chambers beneath mountains or seas, waiting until the world was ready. A few hint that they still walk among us, disguised, veiled, diminished, but not gone. Each possibility carries the same sense of loss. The golden age of open contact was over, and a darker, more uncertain age had begun. Archaeology reflects this shift. The monumental sites of prehistory, megaliths, pyramids, ziggurats, suggest knowledge and ambition that seem out of step with later eras. After the flood myths, architecture grows simpler, technologies regress, societies rebuild on smaller scales. It is as if a great collapse occurred, wiping out not only lives but skills, leaving survivors to begin again with fragments. Some point to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built 12,000 years ago, with carved pillars and astronomical alignments that appear too advanced for hunter-gatherers. Why would such a site be deliberately buried, preserved yet hidden? Was it part of a deliberate concealment, a closing of the age when gods and men mingled? The silence of the gods did not erase their memory. Instead, humanity filled the void with ritual. Priests became intermediaries, claiming to speak on behalf of absent deities. Kings wrapped themselves in divine titles, insisting their blood carried the essence of gods long gone. Temples rose as houses where gods might visit briefly in idyll or vision, but never again as rulers walking in daylight. In this way, the absence of the gods became the foundation of religion. Faith replaced familiarity. Worship became a bridge across a distance that had not existed before. The gods had withdrawn, and humanity was left longing. Yet even as they vanished, they left behind promises. The Mesopotamian Apkallu, banished sages, were said to return in times of need. Quetzalcoatl vowed to come back in the time of darkness. The Book of Revelation envisions angels descending once more, bringing final judgment. The Hopi prophecy of the blue star Kachina speaks of the return of star beings to cleanse and renew the earth. It is as if every culture, in losing its gods, also gained a prophecy. They will return, but only when the cycle demands it. The absence, then, is not final, but preparatory, a silence that waits for a new dawn. Standing in the ruins of ancient cities, one feels the weight of that silence. Temples lie empty, idols broken, inscriptions weathered. The gods that once walked here are gone, leaving only symbols. Yet the myths refuse to die. They remind us that humanity once believed itself surrounded by beings greater than itself, beings who guided, punished, and sometimes loved. Their withdrawal left humanity both diminished and free. Diminished in that we no longer bask in the presence of gods, free in that we now bear the burden of shaping our own destiny. Perhaps the disappearance of the gods was necessary. Perhaps their presence stunted humanity, keeping us as servants or children. Their withdrawal forced us to grow, to invent, to struggle. Yet the myths also suggest loss, that knowledge vanished, that wisdom once granted was taken away, that we live in the shadow of a forgotten golden age. The duality is haunting. We were liberated by absence, yet impoverished by it. And so the question lingers. Where did they go? Were they real beings who retreated to hidden realms, watching from afar? Were they archetypes that receded into the subconscious, leaving only symbols? Or were they exiles from another world, returning to the stars until the time comes again? The myths do not agree, but they all share one conviction. The gods were once here, and now they are gone. That absence defines us as much as their presence once did. Across the Atlantic, far from Mesopotamia and Egypt, another land nurtured its own visions of gods who walked among men. In the valleys and highlands of Mesoamerica, civilizations like the Olmec, the Maya, and the Aztec built temples that rose like mountains, covered with carvings of serpents, jaguars, and celestial beings. Among these figures, one stood apart, a god both gentle and powerful, both human and divine, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His image stretched across centuries, adopted and reimagined by different cultures, but always carrying the same aura of mystery. He was not a remote deity of storms or war, but a teacher, a giver of knowledge, a civilizer who brought light to his people. And most hauntingly, he was a god who left with a promise that one day he would return. The earliest roots of Quetzalcoatl may lie in the Olmecs, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, who carved colossal stone heads and left behind enigmatic depictions of beings with serpentine features. Later, the Toltecs of Tula and the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan embraced him as a central figure. His name itself reveals his paradox. Quetzal, the radiant bird with emerald feathers, and Coatl, the serpent that moves silently through earth and shadow. Together they form a union of sky and soil, a being who bridges the heavens and the ground. Quetzalcoatl embodied duality, divine and mortal, celestial and terrestrial, wise and flawed. Legends tell that Quetzalcoatl descended among mortals not to dominate, but to guide. He taught them agriculture, giving them maize, the very staff of life. He introduced the arts of weaving, pottery, and the calendar, knowledge that ordered society and connected it to the stars. He opposed the ritual of human sacrifice, urging instead offerings of flowers and song. In this, he differs from the harsher deities of the Aztec pantheon, gods who demanded blood to sustain the cosmos. Quetzalcoatl seems almost alien among them, a figure of compassion and enlightenment. Could he have been a memory of a different kind of visitor, one who arrived not to enslave but to uplift? Yet even he was not free from the human shadow of downfall. Stories say that Quetzalcoatl was tricked by his rival, Tezcatlipoca, god of night and sorcery. Through deception and intoxication, he was shamed, and in sorrow he departed. In some versions, he immolated himself, his spirit rising as the morning star, Venus. In others, he sailed eastward across the sea, vowing to return one day in glory. That motif, the departure of a god with the promise of return, resonates powerfully with myths from other lands. Osiris, slain and resurrected. Jesus, who ascended with the promise to come again. Quetzalcoatl, gone but not forever. Each embodies the longing for divine presence to return, for an age of wisdom to dawn again. The ruins of Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were made, still carry his mark. There, the temple of the feathered serpent rises, its walls adorned with rows of serpent heads, plumes curling as if alive in stone. Archaeologists have found beneath it tunnels lined with mica, a mineral with unusual reflective and insulating properties, and chambers filled with liquid mercury, shimmering like pools of starlight. What purpose could such features serve in a ceremonial center? Were they symbolic rivers of the underworld, or did they play a role in rituals that connected Earth with the cosmos? Some speculate they were more than ritual, remnants of a technology beyond the scope of ancient Mesoamerica. Whatever their function, they add to the aura of Quetzalcoatl as a figure tied not only to myth, but to enigmatic material traces. The Aztecs, centuries later, embraced Quetzalcoatl as both ancestor and god. Their priests recorded that he was pale-skinned, bearded, and unlike the people of the land, a description that startled historians when the Spanish conquistadors arrived. Hernán Cortés, with his ships, horses, and steel, was at first mistaken by some to be the returning Quetzalcoatl. This tragic misidentification opened the door to conquest, fulfilling a prophecy in the most devastating way. Whether coincidence or manipulation, the link between prophecy and history reveals the enduring power of Quetzalcoatl's promise. For the Aztecs, the memory of a god who departed but vowed to return was so potent that it shaped their response to strangers from across the sea. But who was he? Was Quetzalcoatl merely a cultural symbol of renewal and order? Or was he a memory of someone real, a being who came from elsewhere and walked among mortals? His gifts, agriculture, the calendar, the stars, mirror those of other culture bringers worldwide. In Mesopotamia, Enki gave knowledge of irrigation. In Greece, Prometheus gave fire. In Polynesia, Maui fished islands from the sea. In every land, there is a figure who brings knowledge, defies other gods, and departs, leaving humanity changed. the consistency suggests more than coincidence. Could Quetzalcoatl, like the others, represent not invention but memory, the trace of encounters with beings who carried wisdom from beyond? What makes Quetzalcoatl haunting is not only his teachings, but his humanity. Unlike many gods of war and domination, he was fallible. He erred, he suffered, he left in sorrow. This vulnerability made him relatable, a god not only of stars but of struggle. His dual nature, divine and flawed, embodied the human condition itself. Perhaps this is why he endured. People saw in him both the possibility of divine guidance and the inevitability of loss. His absence became as important as his presence, for absence created longing, and longing sustained faith. Today, the image of the feathered serpent still coils through the ruins of Mesoamerica. Tourists climb the steps of his temples, unaware that beneath their feet lie chambers of mercury and ancient carvings of stars. Scholars debate his origins, while indigenous traditions preserve his memory as a culture hero, a guide who gave more than he took. In the morning star, Venus, he still shines, rising and setting, a celestial reminder of his cycle of departure and return. Perhaps Quetzalcoatl was only myth, a story shaped by the need for order and compassion in a world of sacrifice and conquest. Or perhaps he was something more, a visitor, a teacher, a being whose presence was real enough to echo in stone, whose departure was so sharp that it etched itself into prophecy. Whatever the truth, the promise of his return remains one of the most powerful motifs in human memory. For across cultures the gods may leave, but they always promise to come back. And in that promise lies hope, fear, and the unending question of whether we are waiting for gods or whether the gods are waiting for us to remember. North of Mexico City, rising from the Valley of Mexico like a petrified dream, stands Teotihuacan, a place the Aztecs encountered centuries after its builders had vanished. They named it the city where the gods were made, for in its silent avenues and colossal pyramids they saw not the work of ordinary men, but of powers beyond. The city sprawls across 20 square kilometers, its wide avenue of the dead lined with temples and palaces, culminating in the massive Pyramid of the Sun and the slightly smaller Pyramid of the Moon. Between them lies the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, its stone walls adorned with rows of serpent heads, plumed and scaled, staring outward, as though keeping watch across the centuries. What makes Teotihuacan so haunting is not only its scale, but its anonymity. No records remain of its rulers, no inscriptions of kings. Unlike the Maya, who filled stelae with dynasties, Teotihuacan left silence. The people who built it are unknown, their language lost, their names erased. When the Aztecs arrived, the city was already abandoned, its temples still monumental, but its palaces empty. They believed it must have been built by the gods themselves, or by a vanished race guided by divine knowledge. Modern archaeology dates its construction to around 100 BCE, flourishing until 550 CE, but cannot answer the deeper questions. Who built it, and why? The layout of the city suggests intention beyond simple urban planning. The Avenue of the Dead aligns with astronomical events, its axis tilted to match the rising of the Pleiades and the movement of the sun at key times of the year. The pyramids of the sun and moon mirror celestial bodies, while the temple of Quetzalcoatl, adorned with feathered serpents and seashells, reflects a cosmology that bound sky, earth, and ocean together. The city seems to have been built as a map of the heavens, a terrestrial mirror of the cosmos. Like the pyramids of Egypt aligned with Orion, Teotihuacan embodies the same principle: to create on earth what exists in the sky. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent, archaeologists have discovered something even stranger. Tunnels stretch beneath the pyramid, leading to chambers lined with reflective mica and filled with pools of liquid mercury. The discovery startled researchers. Mercury, toxic and difficult to obtain, had no obvious ritual purpose in Mesoamerica, yet here it was, shimmering like rivers of silver under torchlight. Some have suggested it symbolized the underworld, the rivers that souls must cross in death. Others wonder if it had a more practical function, perhaps connected to energy or light. Mica, too, is unusual. Found in layers beneath floors and walls, it is a mineral with insulating and reflective properties. Was it symbolic, or was it part of a technology we no longer understand? These materials, rare and difficult to transport, suggest purpose beyond decoration. The sheer size of the pyramids deepens the mystery. The Pyramid of the Sun rises over 70 meters high, built from millions of tons of stone and earth. From its summit, one can see the alignment of the entire city, its avenues stretching like rays of a cosmic diagram. Standing there, it feels less like a human city, and more like a stage set for gods, a place where rituals reenacted the creation of the world. The absence of royal tombs or inscriptions suggests that the focus was not on kings, but on the cosmos itself. The city was dedicated not to the glory of individuals, but to the reenactment of cosmic order. A place where humans participated in the cycles of the heavens. Yet legends hint at something more. The Aztecs believed Teotihuacan was the place where the fifth sun was born, the age in which we now live. They said that when the world lay in darkness, the gods gathered there, sacrificed themselves, and rekindled the sun. The pyramids, in this telling, are not monuments but altars where cosmic renewal took place. If so, then Teotihuacan wasn't merely a city, but a cosmic machine designed to maintain the balance of the universe. The mercury rivers and mica chambers beneath it might then represent the underworld, the hidden mechanisms of renewal, the unseen forces that sustain life. Some researchers have speculated even further. They note that the combination of mica and mercury resembles components of energy systems, that the alignment of pyramids and tunnels might reflect not only cosmology, but function. Could Teotihuacan have been more than ceremonial, perhaps a site of experimentation with natural forces? To many, such theories sound like fantasy, yet they echo similar questions asked of the Egyptian pyramids. Why do so many ancient monuments, scattered across continents, share alignments with stars, use unusual materials, and hint at purposes beyond tombs and temples? Are these coincidences, or are they fragments of a deeper tradition, the memory of knowledge older than the civilizations that inherited it? The silence of Teotihuacan is its loudest feature. No kings, no battles, no names, only temples aligned to the stars and tunnels filled with strange materials. It is as if the builders wanted the city to speak not of themselves, but of the cosmos, to endure as a map of time rather than a record of men. And yet, its sudden collapse around the 6th century CE remains unexplained. Some evidence suggests internal revolt, fires and abandonment. Others hint at drought or famine. Whatever the cause, the city emptied, its grandeur left to crumble. By the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later, it was already a ruin, a sacred place inhabited only by memory. To walk its avenues today is to step into that memory. The Pyramid of the Sun rises before you, massive and silent, its stone steps leading upward towards the heavens. The Pyramid of the Moon anchors the northern horizon, aligned with the sacred mountain beyond. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, with its carved rows of plumed serpents, whispers of a god who once walked among men, departed, and promised to return. Beneath the surface, rivers of mercury still glisten in the dark, unseen by the sun, but carrying their own secrets. The city does not explain itself. It asks questions, written in stone, in silence, in alignments with the stars. Perhaps Teotihuacan was nothing more than the pinnacle of human ingenuity, a city built by visionaries who sought to mirror the heavens. Or perhaps it was more, a place where gods and men conspired, where knowledge was preserved in stone and in tunnels, waiting for the day it would be understood again. Whatever the truth, it remains one of the greatest enigmas of antiquity, a city without rulers, without history, but filled with the weight of something larger. The Aztecs were not wrong to call it the place where gods were made. For in its silence, its immensity, and its mystery, Teotihuacan still feels like a place where heaven once touched the earth. Stretching across the arid plains of southern Peru lies a canvas so vast that its designs cannot be fully grasped from the ground. The Nazca lines, etched into the desert floor by removing the dark, oxidized stones to reveal the pale earth beneath, form geoglyphs that cover nearly 500 square kilometers. Some are simple straight lines that run for kilometers across the barren land. Others are complex figures, a monkey with a coiled tail, a spider with impossibly long legs, a hummingbird whose wings stretch for hundreds of feet, a heron, a jaguar, even what appears to be a humanoid figure waving from the side of a hill. For centuries, these lines lay hidden in plain sight, too vast to be recognized until pilots in the 20th century flew overhead and saw the images from the sky. Only then did the full scope of this desert mystery reveal itself. Art meant not for human eyes on the ground, but for those looking down from above. The Nazca people who created them flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They left behind pottery, textiles, and irrigation systems, but no texts, no records explaining the purpose of the lines. The desert's dryness preserved them, as wind and rain are scarce. But their meaning is debated. Some scholars believe they were ritual pathways, used in ceremonies to honor water and fertility. Pilgrims may have walked the lines as offerings to the gods of the sky and earth, tracing sacred paths with their feet. Others see them as giant calendars, alignments marking solstices and equinoxes, linking the movements of the sun and stars to the rhythms of agriculture. But the sheer size of the figures, the fact that they can only be appreciated from the air, raises questions that reach beyond ordinary explanations. Why build images no one on the ground could see? Some suggest they were made for the gods themselves, sky beings who would look down and recognize the devotion of mortals. From the ground, the lines may have been invisible as pictures, but from above, they are unmistakable. A hummingbird stretching across the desert is not for human eyes, it is for watchers in the heavens. In this light, the Nazca lines resemble messages, signals carved into the earth to attract attention from above. Were they prayers written in a language of geometry and image? Prayers not to invisible forces, but to beings literally in the sky? The precision of some lines deepens the mystery. Straight and unbroken for kilometers, they run across uneven terrain, hills and valleys without deviation, as though laid down with surveying tools far beyond the technology of the time. Some intersect at angles that suggest astronomical intention, aligning with the rising and setting of specific stars. Others radiate outward like runways, long strips that seem less like art and more like pathways for descent. It is this runway-like appearance that has fueled speculation. Could the Nazca lines have been landing strips, not for birds or men, but for machines of the sky? The idea, popularized in the 20th century, may sound far-fetched, yet the imagery of endless, straight runways carved into desert rock leaves the question open. Equally puzzling are the Parasha's geoglyphs nearby, including the famous candelabra, a massive three-pronged symbol carved into the hillside, visible from the sea but not easily from land. Sailors could see it from afar, a beacon pointing inland. Its similarity to later Nazca lines suggests continuity. A long tradition of inscribing the land with symbols meant to be seen from impossible perspectives. The Paracas people also practiced cranial elongation, shaping skulls into stretched forms that gave them an alien appearance. Did they do this to imitate the gods they believed descended from the skies? The same gods for whom they carved vast images into the desert? Archaeologists who study the Nazca stress ritual, astronomy, and agriculture as explanations. They emphasize that the people of Nazca depended on scarce water, and the lines may have been ways to invoke rain or fertility. Yet the images of animals are not random. The hummingbird is associated with fertility, the spider with water, the monkey with abundance. These symbols form a kind of language, a visual invocation written across the earth. Still, the scale remains uncanny. Why not make smaller figures, visible to participants in rituals, instead of massive geoglyphs that only gods or machines could fully see? Standing on the desert plain, you see only lines stretching into the horizon. But from the air, the images leap into focus, startling in their clarity. This perspective shift embodies the mystery itself. The Nazca people invested enormous effort in something they could not themselves see in its entirety. That choice speaks of faith, faith that someone above would see, or that seeing was never for humans at all. Modern speculation aside, the Nazca lines remind us of the persistent motif found across cultures, the sky as the realm of gods, the earth as their canvas. Just as Egyptians aligned pyramids with Orion, and Mesopotamians spoke of kingship descending from the heavens, the Nazca carved the earth with images only sky beings could witness. Whether those beings were gods, ancestors, or something stranger, the impulse was the same: to connect the ground with the sky, to leave a message for watchers above. In 2018, researchers using drones discovered dozens of new figures hidden among hillsides and invisible from older aerial surveys. These include warriors, animals, and geometric designs, expanding the mystery further. Each new discovery deepens the sense that the desert is a vast text, a book still being read. It suggests that what we know is only part of the whole, that countless images may still lie waiting beneath the stones. When you look upon photographs of the Nazca monkey, its tail coiling in perfect spiral, or the hummingbird's long beak etched across meters of sand. The effect is humbling. These are not crude marks, but deliberate, elegant designs meant to endure for millennia. They whisper across time of a people who believed their devotion had to be inscribed not in temples or statues, but into the very skin of the earth. The desert itself became a scroll, a message written in lines so vast they could only be read from the heavens. Whether we see them as rituals of fertility, astronomical diagrams, or signals to sky beings, the Nazca lines remind us of humanity's ancient longing to be seen from above. They are silent prayers, written in stone, asking for rain, for blessing, for recognition. Perhaps they were never meant to be explained in words. Perhaps their meaning lies in the act itself. Humans carving the earth to reach the sky, bridging the gap with geometry, with faith, with silence. And so they remain, stretching across the desert, lines that lead nowhere yet point everywhere, figures that no one on the ground could ever fully see, but that endure as one of the greatest enigmas of human history. To this day, they whisper to the skies, "We are here, we remember, we reach upward." In the highlands of Guatemala, where mist drifts through mountains thick with jungle, the Quiche Maya preserved one of the most profound origin stories in the world, the Popol Vuh. It is often called the Maya Book of Counsel, a scripture that blends myth, history, and cosmology. At its heart lies a story of creation unlike any other, a story not of one attempt but of several, as if the makers of the world were experimenting, testing, failing, and trying again until they found a form that endured. It is a story of clay men who melted in the rain, wooden men who had no souls, and finally the people of maize, the true humans, who remain to this day. The tale begins with a void. In the beginning, the sky and the sea existed, but the earth was not yet formed. Out of this emptiness came the creator gods, heart of sky, heart of earth, and their companions. They desired to make beings who could honor them, who could sustain the balance of the world with offerings and worship. Their first attempt was with mud. From the earth they shaped figures, soft and fragile. But when rain fell, the mud dissolved, the figures crumbled, and the gods saw that this creation could not endure. It was too weak, too temporary, incapable of sustaining life. So they tried again, this time with wood. From trees they carved figures with form and movement. These wooden people could walk and speak, but they had no hearts, no souls, no understanding. They were hollow, empty of gratitude, unable to remember their makers. They multiplied, but they did not honor the gods, and so the gods unleashed a terrible punishment. Their tools, their grinding stones, their cooking pots rose against them. Even their dogs and turkeys turned on them, crying out for vengeance, tearing their masters apart. Then a great flood came, sweeping the wooden people away. Their remnants, the story says, became the monkeys of the forest, echoes of a failed creation. The image is haunting. Humanity is not presented as inevitable, but as the product of trial and error. The gods themselves struggle, experimenting with materials, discarding prototypes. The clay men dissolve. The wooden men lack soul. Only after failure do they find the substance that will endure. Maize. From the white and yellow corn, ground and mixed with water, the gods fashion flesh and blood. From maize dough they mold arms and legs, shaping true humans. These new beings are strong, resilient, capable of reverence. Maize becomes not only food, but identity. To the Maya, they were the people of maize, sustained by it, made of it, living and dying by its cycles. This myth reveals a worldview in which humanity is inseparable from the land. Maize was not just a crop, it was sacred substance, the very essence of life. Every harvest was a reenactment of creation, every tortilla a reminder that the people themselves were made of corn. In this sense, the Popol Vuh is not only a story of origins, but a cosmology that ties human existence to agriculture, to the rhythms of growth, death, and rebirth. Yet beneath this agricultural symbolism lies something stranger. The sequence of failed creations resembles an account of experimentation, almost like trial runs of design. First clay, too fragile, then wood, functional but soulless. Finally maize, balanced and enduring. It is as if the gods were not omnipotent but craftsmen, learning as they went, refining their techniques until they achieved success. This portrayal aligns with themes from Mesopotamia, where humans are made from clay and divine blood, and from the Book of Enoch, where angels meddle with creation. In each case, humanity emerges not in a single stroke, but in a process fraught with mistakes, revisions, and costs. The destruction of the wooden people is particularly vivid. Their punishment is not by gods alone, but by the very objects of their daily lives. Their tools rebel, their animals revolt. It is as if the natural world itself rejected them, declaring them unworthy. This imagery suggests more than myth. It conveys the Maya understanding that creation is not complete until balance exists between humans and the world. Without reverence, without gratitude, creation collapses. The wooden people perished because they did not honor, did not remember, did not sustain the harmony that the gods required. When the true humans of maize were made, the gods also learned restraint. At first, these beings were too perfect, their vision too sharp. They saw to the ends of the earth. Their knowledge rivaled that of the gods. Disturbed, the makers breathed a mist over their eyes, clouding their vision, limiting their understanding. Humanity, in this telling, was deliberately made imperfect, constrained, so that they would remain humble before the divine. Once again we encounter the recurring motif: knowledge withheld, boundaries drawn, humans fashioned to serve and honor, but not to rival their creators. It is the same tension found in Eden, in the story of Prometheus, in myths across the globe. Humanity reaches too far, and the gods impose limits. The Popol Vuh also tells of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who later descend into Xibalba, the underworld, to defeat the lords of death. Their triumph ensures the balance of life and death, the renewal of the world. But their story, like the creation myths before it, reflects the same idea: that humanity's place is precarious, won through trial, maintained through struggle, always dependent on harmony with forces greater than itself. What lingers in the Popol Vuh is the sense of memory. The tale was written down in the 16th century, after the Spanish conquest, but it preserves traditions far older, passed down orally for generations. Its imagery of failed creations, floods, and divine experiments resonates with myths from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. The Maya did not know of Sumer or Babylon, yet their myths echo the same patterns: claymen, floods, hybrid beings, divine limits placed upon mortals. How can cultures separated by oceans share such motifs? Are they coincidences or fragments of a deeper, older story, remembered in different tongues? Standing in the highlands today, among maize fields that ripple in the wind, the myth feels alive. Farmers plant corn with rituals, offering prayers to the earth, honoring the crop that is both sustenance and identity. To them, they are still people of maize, living embodiments of the myth. And in every tortilla pressed, every harvest gathered, the story of creation is renewed. Perhaps the Popol Vuh is only an agricultural allegory, a way of reminding people that their lives depend on maize. Or perhaps it is more, a memory of ancient attempts to shape humanity, to find the right material, to balance strength with soul. Its imagery of failed prototypes and divine adjustments is too precise to dismiss. Like the clay men of Sumer or the wooden men of Genesis Nephilim, the wooden people of the Maya speak to a universal question. Were we made in one stroke? Or were we refined through trials, some forgotten, some erased? The Maya answered with maize. They declared themselves not clay, not wood, but corn. And in that declaration lies both humility and pride. Humility because they are the product of God's labor, pride because they are the final, enduring creation. The Popol Vuh whispers that we are not inevitable, that we exist because the gods tried and failed, then tried again. And so every harvest, every meal of maize becomes more than nourishment. It becomes memory, the taste of creation itself. Among the most striking stories preserved in the Popol Vuh is the tale of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Their journey into the depths of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, is not only an epic adventure, but a profound allegory of death, rebirth, and the struggle between mortal resilience and divine power. Where the earlier chapters of the Popol Vuh describe the failed creations of humanity, the hero twins embody the triumph of balance, the victory of wit and courage over forces that seem overwhelming. Their saga is not only a myth, but a cosmic drama, written across the stars and remembered in ritual for centuries. The story begins with their father and uncle, Hunahpu and Hunahpu, great ball players who attracted the attention of the lords of Xibalba. Angered by the noise of their game, these death gods summoned them to the underworld. The brothers descended, but they failed the trials set before them. They were sacrificed, their bodies buried, and Hunahpu's head was hung in a calabash tree. Yet life persisted even in death. His skull spit into the hand of Squick, a maiden of Xibalba, and she conceived the hero twins. From the union of death and the living womb, new champions were born. Already the tale teaches its lesson, that life springs from decay, that endings give birth to beginnings, that no defeat is final. As the twins grew, they displayed extraordinary gifts. They too became master ball players, echoing their father's skill. Their talent once again stirred the lords of Xibalba, who summoned them to undergo the deadly trials of the underworld. Yet, unlike their father, the twins were clever, cautious, and cunning. They entered Xibalba not as victims, but as challengers. The underworld they faced was no vague realm of shadows. It was vividly described as a place of houses filled with trials. The house of darkness, the house of cold, the house of jaguars, the house of bats. Each chamber was designed to kill or terrify. But the twins, guided by wit, survived each ordeal. Where others succumbed, they turned the rules of the game against their opponents, tricking the death gods at their own contests. In one of the most famous episodes, they allowed themselves to be killed and burned, their ashes cast into the river. Yet from those ashes they were reborn, transformed into fish, and then into traveling magicians. Disguised, they returned to Xibalba, performing wonders, cutting themselves apart and reassembling their bodies, astonishing the lords of death. At last, the lords begged for the trick to be performed on them. The twins obliged, killing the lords but refusing to revive them. In this way, the rulers of Xibalba were destroyed, and the twins triumphed where their father had failed. The myth is layered with meaning. On one level, it is a tale of courage, wit, and perseverance, showing that even the most overwhelming powers can be defeated by intelligence and resolve. On another level, it is cosmic allegory. The ball game was sacred in Maya culture, symbolizing the movement of the sun and moon, the cycles of life and death. The hero twins' victory is mirrored in the heavens, where they ascend as celestial bodies, one becoming the sun, the other the moon, their daily cycle echoing their struggle in Xibalba. Thus the story is written not only in text, but in the very rhythm of day and night. The saga also carries echoes of myths from across the world. Like Osiris in Egypt, whose death and rebirth ensured the cycle of fertility, the twins embody renewal through sacrifice. Like Persephone in Greece, who descends into Hades and returns to bring spring, their journey explains the rhythm of seasons and life. And like Christ in Christian tradition, who descends into death and rises again, they embody triumph over mortality. Across cultures, the theme repeats: descent, trial, death, resurrection, victory. The hero twins are part of that global archetype, their story both uniquely Maya and universally human. What is striking is the way their victory redefines humanity's place in the cosmos. Earlier myths showed humans as fragile, failed experiments of clay and wood, dependent on divine favor. But in the hero twins, humanity achieves dignity. They defeat the lords of death not through brute strength, but through cunning, resilience, and courage. They succeed where gods and ancestors failed. In their triumph, mortals prove themselves worthy of a place in the cosmic order. This may explain why the story endured for centuries, why ball courts became sacred spaces across Mesoamerica, why the game was more than sport but ritual, a reenactment of cosmic struggle. Every time the ball bounced between stone walls, the players reenacted the battle of the twins against death, keeping alive the memory that death can be outwitted, that life renews itself. Archaeology confirms the sacred role of the ball game. Ball courts are found in nearly every major Mesoamerican city, from Copan to Chichen Itza. Reliefs show players dressed in elaborate gear, sometimes in scenes of sacrifice. The game was dangerous, sometimes fatal, its stakes more than entertainment. It was a theater of myth, a way of bringing cosmic truths into human life. When the twins are remembered as ball players, it is not trivial. It is central. They carried the cosmic drama into a form that every community could reenact, binding daily life to divine story. The twins' defeat of Xibalba also speaks to a broader theme, the taming of chaos. In many myths, gods or heroes battle primordial forces, chaos serpents, titans, dragons, to establish order. The hero twins do this not in the heavens, but in the underworld, bringing balance to the cycle of life and death. They do not abolish death. They contain it, limit its power, and transform it into part of the cycle. In this way, they embody wisdom rather than conquest. The world is not saved by erasing darkness, but by harmonizing it with light. Standing in the Maya highlands today, where ancient ball courts lie in ruins, one can imagine the echoes of rubber balls striking stone, the chants of spectators, the prayers of priests. Each match was not a game, but a reenactment of the twins' victory, a way of keeping balance in the cosmos. Above, the sun and moon trace their eternal cycle, silent reminders of the heroes who descended into death and returned triumphant. The Popol Vuh ends their story not with simple victory, but with transformation. They do not remain as rulers on earth. They ascend to the sky, becoming celestial bodies that continue to guide and watch. Their triumph is not for themselves alone, but for all humanity. For their story assures that death is not final, that every descent is followed by return, that every darkness is followed by light. Perhaps the hero twins never lived, or perhaps they are the mythologized memory of real figures whose deeds became legend. Either way, their saga carries truth. Not historical truth, but cosmic truth, the kind that resonates across cultures and ages. In them we see the human dream of overcoming mortality, of turning defeat into victory, of ensuring that even in the face of death, life rises again. In the mesas of the American Southwest, where the desert stretches in ochre waves and the sky opens in an endless dome, the Hopi people have carried their traditions through centuries of drought, conquest, and change. Their villages cling to the cliffs of Arizona, the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America. Yet beneath the quiet endurance of their daily life lies a body of prophecy and myth that speaks of cosmic cycles, visitors from the stars, and the fragile balance between humanity and the universe. To the Hopi, history is not a straight line, but a series of worlds, each rising, flourishing, collapsing, and giving way to the next. And at the heart of their vision are the Kachinas, spirit beings who come from the stars, and the prophecy of the blue star Kachina, a sign that the current world will soon end. The Hopi tell of earlier worlds destroyed by fire, by ice, by flood. Each time, a remnant survived, guided by spiritual beings into caves or across waters, emerging to begin again. We now live, they say, in the fourth world, but the fifth is approaching. The transition is never gentle. Each ending comes with catastrophe, a cleansing of corruption, a renewal through destruction. In this, the Hopi echo the Hindu yugas, the Aztec suns, the biblical floods. Across cultures, the theme repeats. Humanity rises and falls in cycles, each age ending with fire or water, each beginning with guidance from beyond. Central to the Hopi tradition are the Kachinas, a vast pantheon of spirits who serve as intermediaries between humans and higher realms. In ceremonies, dancers don masks and costumes to embody them, bringing blessings of rain, fertility, and guidance. Yet the Kachinas are not imagined as mere symbols. They are described as real beings who come from the stars, luminous and powerful, who once lived among the Hopi and promised to return. Some elders speak of them descending in flying shields, crafts that shone with light, carrying beings who taught the people how to plant, how to live in harmony with the land, how to prepare for the cycles of change. The line between spirit and extraterrestrial blurs here. Were the Kachinas gods, ancestors, or visitors? To the Hopi, the categories do not matter. They were guides, beings of the sky who shaped human destiny. Among the many Kachinas, one prophecy stands apart: the coming of the blue star Kachina. According to oral tradition, when this spirit removes its mask and dances in the plaza, it signals the beginning of the Great Purification. The appearance of a blue star in the heavens will mark the end of the fourth world and the dawn of the fifth. The prophecy speaks of upheaval, the earth shaken, the seas rising, fire sweeping the land. Only those who live in balance, who keep the old ways, will survive to see the renewal. For the Hopi, this is not distant metaphor but living warning, carried in ceremonies, retold in whispers. Modern interpreters have linked the blue star Kachina to celestial events, comets, supernovas, or even modern spacecraft. In 1997, some saw the Hale-Bopp comet as a sign, a possible fulfillment of prophecy. Others speak of Sirius, the blue-white star, as the harbinger. Still others suggest the prophecy speaks of something yet to come, a light that will appear in the sky when the time of renewal arrives. Whatever its form, the blue star Kachina embodies the recurring motif of return, that the beings who guided humanity once will come again, not in peace, but in judgment, to cleanse and renew the world. The Hopi cosmology also speaks of the ant people, mysterious beings who sheltered humanity during past cataclysms. When fire rained from the sky and the earth burned, the ant people took survivors into their underground homes, fed them with seeds, and protected them until it was safe to emerge. The imagery is evocative: insect-like beings, subterranean shelters, survival through cosmic disaster. To modern ears, it recalls stories of underground bunkers, of alien beings, of hidden refuges. Yet for the Hopi, it is part of living memory, a reminder that survival has always depended on guidance from others, whether gods, spirits, or star visitors. What makes the Hopi traditions striking is their emphasis on choice. The cycles of destruction and renewal are inevitable, but survival depends on living rightly, in harmony with the earth and with each other. The prophecy of the blue star Kachina is not simply doom, but a test. When the star appears, when the world trembles, those who have forgotten balance will perish, while those who honor the old ways will endure. It is both warning and hope, destruction and renewal, despair and promise. The similarities with other cultures are uncanny. The Hopi's cycles of worlds resemble the Hindu yugas and the Aztec suns. Their blue star prophecy echoes Quetzalcoatl's promise to return, or the Christian vision of the Second Coming. Their ant people resemble the Mesopotamian Apkallu, sages who guided humanity, or the beings of Enoch who descended to instruct. Across the globe, the same patterns emerge: guidance from above, catastrophe, survival, renewal. The Hopi stand as one more voice in the chorus of humanity's memory of cycles and sky beings. To stand on the mesas at dusk, watching the sun set over the desert, is to feel the weight of these stories. The land itself seems timeless, a place where cycles can unfold without end. The Hopi villages, with their stone houses and kivas, endure as they have for centuries, their ceremonies continuing despite the modern world pressing in. The dancers don their Kachina masks, the drums beat, the songs rise into the night. For the Hopi, these are not performances, but renewals, ways of keeping balance, of preparing for what is to come. Every dance is both memory and prophecy, linking the present to the ages before and the ages ahead. Perhaps the blue star Kachina will never appear. Perhaps it is symbol, a warning to live in harmony. Or perhaps one night a new light will blaze in the heavens, unmistakable, and the Hopi will know the time has come. Whether myth or memory, their prophecy carries the same truth. The world is fragile, cycles turn, and survival depends not on power but on balance. In their vision, humanity is not the master of history, but a participant in a dance far older and larger, guided by beings from the stars who remind us that endings are always beginnings. In the dry cliffs of Mali, where sandstone plateaus rise above the Sahel, the Dogon people have lived for centuries in villages carved into the rock. Their culture is rich in masks, dances, and cosmology, a worldview that ties earth to sky in ways that astonish even modern scholars. For among their traditions lies one of the most puzzling enigmas of ethnography: detailed knowledge of the star Sirius, knowledge they should not have possessed without telescopes. The Dogon speak of Sirius not as a single star, but as a system, with companions invisible to the naked eye, and they trace their own origins to beings who came from there, the Nommo, amphibious teachers who descended in the beginning of time. The Dogon myth recounts that Amma, the supreme creator, formed the world from a cosmic egg, spinning in the void. From this egg came twin beings, the Nommo, often described as part human, part fish, or amphibian spirits connected to water and life. The Nommo descended from the heavens to bring order, teaching the Dogon agriculture, weaving, and the ways of the cosmos. They were culture bringers, guides who established rituals and calendars, ensuring harmony between humanity and the universe. The myth tells that they came in a vessel that spun and flashed as it descended, raising a whirlwind of dust. To some listeners, this description sounds eerily like the landing of a craft, remembered through the language of myth. What makes the Dogon myth remarkable is not only its imagery, but its astronomy. According to anthropologists who studied them in the 1930s, the Dogon already knew that Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, had an invisible companion. They called it Po Tolo, the small star, describing it as incredibly heavy, dense, and moving in a 50-year elliptical orbit around Sirius A. This is striking because Sirius B, a white dwarf star with exactly these properties, was not observed by Western astronomers until the mid-19th century, and its density was not understood until even later. The Dogon also spoke of a third star in the system, Emma Ya, with its own orbit. While astronomers still debate whether Sirius has a third companion, the detail is uncanny. How could a pre-industrial people, without telescopes, possess such knowledge? Some scholars argue that the Dogon may have learned this information from contact with Europeans, perhaps missionaries or travelers who told them about Sirius. Others note inconsistencies in the ethnographic record, suggesting misinterpretation or exaggeration by early researchers. Yet the Dogon place Sirius at the center of their rituals and cosmology, long before modern astronomy could have influenced them deeply. Their masked dances reenact the cosmic movements of stars. Their ceremonies align with the 50-year orbit of Po Tolo. Whether borrowed or ancient, the knowledge is woven into their identity. The Nommo themselves carry archetypal resonance. Described as amphibious, they recall Oannes, the fishman of Mesopotamian legend who rose from the sea to teach humanity writing and law. They echo the Apkallu, sages part fish, part man, who guided kings. They resemble the Enki of Sumer, the god of water and wisdom, who shaped humanity from clay and blood. Even in the Americas, Viracocha of the Andes was said to emerge from Lake Titicaca, bringing civilization. Across the world, the motif recurs. Culture bringers emerging from the water, luminous beings who blend human and aquatic traits, teachers of agriculture, astronomy, and order. The Dogon Nommo are part of this global chorus, yet their connection to Sirius adds a cosmic dimension. Not only beings of earth or sea, but messengers from the stars. Their story is one of fragmentation and return. The myth says that one of the primordial twins rebelled, disrupting creation, and the world fell into disorder. To restore balance, the other Nommo sacrificed itself, was dismembered, and descended again to bring harmony. This theme of rebellion, sacrifice, and restoration echoes myths elsewhere. The Watchers in Enoch who defied heaven, Osiris who was dismembered and restored, Quetzalcoatl who departed in shame with a promise to return. The Nommo embody the same archetype, beings whose descent brings both disruption and salvation, whose blood ensures life. What is most compelling is the way the Dogon link their identity to the stars. For them, the cosmos is not abstract, but immediate. The cycles of Sirius are tied to agriculture, rituals, and festivals. The Sigui ceremony, held every 60 years, reenacts the creation of the world and the descent of the Nommo, its timing echoing the orbit of Sirius B. The masks worn in these ceremonies stretch tall and narrow, as if reaching towards the heavens, embodying the connection between sky and earth. In this way, the Dogon encode cosmic knowledge not in books, but in ritual, not in telescopes, but in dance. Modern astronomy confirms part of their lore. Sirius B does exist. It is dense. It does orbit Sirius A in roughly 50 years. Whether the Dogon learned this through ancient contact, intuitive tradition, or later transmission remains debated. But even if explained by cultural diffusion, the resonance remains. Why is it always Sirius? Across Africa and beyond, Sirius appears as a star of profound importance. In Egypt, its heliacal rising marked the flooding of the Nile and the beginning of the year. In Greece, it was associated with the scorching heat of summer. For the Dogon, it is the home of their ancestors, the Nommo. The same star, bright in every night sky, carries different yet interconnected myths, always tied to life, cycles, and renewal. Standing in the cliffs of Bandiagara, where Dogon villages cling to rock faces, one can see the stars with clarity impossible in modern cities. Sirius blazes in the night, brighter than any other. For the Dogon, it is not just a point of light, but a reminder of origin, of descent, of beings who once came to guide and promised to return. In their dances, their masks, their stories, the memory lives on. Perhaps the Nommo are no more than myth, symbolic representations of order emerging from chaos, of life springing from water. Perhaps their knowledge of Sirius was coincidence, misinterpreted by outsiders. Or perhaps the Dogon preserve something older, a memory of contact with beings who came from the stars, who left knowledge encoded in ritual. Whatever the truth, the Dogon cosmology joins the chorus of myths worldwide that speak of visitors, of teachers, of beings who bridged heaven and earth. The question remains, how did they know what they knew? The Dogon themselves answer simply, the Nommo told us. To modern ears, that may sound implausible. Yet in their stories, as in so many others, lies a possibility that history has forgotten more than it remembers, that the stars have always been closer than we think, and that the line between myth and memory is thinner than we dare admit. Across the myths of nearly every culture lingers the shadow of beings larger than life, immense in stature, strength, and sometimes in wisdom. They are remembered as builders of megaliths, adversaries of gods, or ancestors of vanished tribes. Their names differ: Nephilim, Titans, Jotnar, Anakim, ogres, but the motif repeats with uncanny persistence. Giants once walked the earth. Whether as symbols of chaos, as rulers of an earlier age, or as literal beings, the memory of giants forms a hidden thread weaving through the story of humanity. In the Hebrew tradition, giants appear as the Nephilim, born from the union of the Watchers and the daughters of men. Genesis calls them mighty men of renown, yet condemns them as corrupt. Their violence and arrogance became one reason for the Great Flood, which swept them away. Yet traces of them persist in later texts: the Anakim, the Rephaim, the formidable Goliath whom David faced. These figures are not allegories in the biblical narrative. They are described as literal beings, taller, stronger, feared by entire nations. The Israelites, spying the land of Canaan, reported that its inhabitants were giants, before whom they felt like grasshoppers. Whether exaggeration or memory, the texts present giants as a reality that shaped the fears and wars of ancient peoples. In Greece, the memory of giants takes mythic form in the Titans, the primal beings who ruled before Zeus and the Olympians. The Titanomachy describes their war, a clash that shook the cosmos. Defeated, they were cast into Tartarus, deep beneath the earth. Yet they were not erased. Their legacy continued through the Gigantomachy, battles against their monstrous descendants, and through figures like Atlas, condemned to hold up the sky. Here, giants symbolize primordial forces, older than the gods of Olympus, reminders that order is always threatened by chaos lurking beneath. Still, their portrayal as immense, powerful beings resonates with the same archetype: a world once ruled by giants, supplanted but not forgotten. The Norse myths preserve giants in abundance. The Jotnar, often mistranslated simply as giants, but more accurately, devourers or elemental beings. They are not merely large, but embodiments of natural forces: frost, fire, mountain, sea. The gods themselves, the Asir, are intertwined with them through ancestry and marriage. Odin, the Allfather, is descended from giants. Thor's greatest battles are with them, his hammer smashing their monstrous forms. At Ragnarok, the end of the world, giants will march again, led by fire and frost, to overwhelm the gods. In this tradition, giants are not simply foes, but kin, ancestors, and ultimate adversaries, part of the cosmic cycle of destruction and renewal. Even in the Americas, the motif recurs. The Paiute people of Nevada tell of the Site Ka, a race of red-haired giants who were enemies of their ancestors. According to legend, after long wars, the Paiute trapped the last of them in a cave and set it on fire. Archaeologists later discovered Lovelock Cave, where giant sandals and unusually large skeletal remains were reported, though many of these finds were dismissed or lost. In South America, the chronicles of early Spanish explorers tell of encountering natives of extraordinary height in Patagonia, leading to the enduring legend of Patagonian giants. Whether exaggerated accounts of tall tribes or echoes of something stranger, the motif persisted. In Polynesia, Traditions speak of the Menehune, small in stature, but also of larger-than-life builders who raised stone platforms and walls. In Ireland, giants are credited with the construction of the Giant's Causeway, its hexagonal stones said to be the remains of a bridge built by Fionn mac Cumhail. In Basque legend, the Gentilac were giant shepherds who built dolmens before retreating into the mountains with the arrival of Christianity. Across the globe, megalithic architecture is attributed to giants. The Cyclopean walls of Greece, the dolmens of Europe, the standing stones of Britain. When later generations encountered monuments they could not explain, they declared, "Giants must have built them." Why do so many cultures, separated by oceans, preserve the memory of giants? Some scholars interpret them as archetypes, symbols of chaos, nature, or the primordial past. Others suggest they reflect encounters with unusually tall tribes, exaggerated into myth. Yet the persistence and detail raise deeper questions. Could the myths preserve memory of an earlier humanity, a branch of our species larger and stronger, now extinct? Fossil records do show that hominids varied greatly in size, from diminutive Homo floresiensis to robust Neanderthals. Might legends of giants recall encounters with such beings magnified over generations? Or are they, as some suggest, memories of hybrid offspring, Nephilim, born of unions between humans and beings from beyond? The archaeology of giants remains controversial. Reports of oversized skeletons unearthed in North America circulated in the 19th century, published in newspapers of the time, though later dismissed or hidden. Skeptics argue exaggeration and mismeasurement. Believers insist the evidence was suppressed because it did not fit official narratives. In South America, elongated skulls from paracas and massive bones discovered in caves add fuel to speculation. Whether hoaxes, misinterpretations, or real anomalies, these findings mirror the myths. Bones of beings too large to be ordinary men. Yet even if physical giants never walked the earth, their presence in myth serves a function. They remind humanity of limits. Giants represent forces too vast for ordinary mortals to control. Storms, mountains, floods, time itself. To defeat a giant is to master chaos, to bring order from wildness. David slays Goliath, Zeus overthrows the Titans, Thor smashes the Jotnar. Each victory symbolizes humanity's ascent, the triumph of order over raw force. But the giants never vanish. They linger, threatening return. Their memory tells us that beneath our fragile civilizations lies a more ancient, more powerful world, one that can awaken at any moment. Standing in the ruins of Stonehenge or among the dolmens of Europe, one feels the weight of that memory. These stones, massive and immovable, seem the work of hands larger than ours. The myths say giants built them. Perhaps that is only imagination. Or perhaps it is memory, dim but persistent, of a time when beings greater than us walked the earth, leaving behind monuments we still cannot fully explain. Whether literal or symbolic, the giants endure. They are in scripture, in epic, in folklore, in stone. They remind us that humanity has always felt small before the forces of the world, and has always sought to explain those forces through stories of beings vast and powerful. Perhaps the giants were never flesh and blood. Or perhaps they were, and we are the grasshoppers who survived their fall. Across continents, massive stones rise from the earth, arranged in circles, aligned with the heavens, or stacked into platforms so vast that even modern machinery would struggle to move them. These megaliths, monuments of stone older than empires, remain some of the greatest enigmas of human history. How were they built? Why were they aligned to the stars? And who possessed the knowledge to conceive them? To stand before them is to feel both awe and unease, for they suggest that something immense, whether human or other, once moved through the world, leaving traces too heavy to ignore. Perhaps the most famous is Stonehenge, on the Salisbury Plain of England. Its ring of standing stones, some weighing over 20 tons, was erected around 2500 BCE, though earlier earthworks date back even further. The stones align with the solstices. On midsummer morning, the sun rises directly above the heelstone, casting its light into the heart of the circle. This alignment reveals a deep understanding of astronomy, encoded in stone by people who left no written records. How did Neolithic farmers, with only stone tools and wooden sledges, transport these massive stones, some from quarries over 150 miles away in Wales? Theories abound: rolling logs, sledges, waterways. Yet even if the logistics can be explained, the purpose remains elusive. Was Stonehenge a temple of the sun, a calendar, a burial site, or a gateway between worlds? For the people who built it, it was surely sacred, a place where earth and sky touched. Travel east to Lebanon, and the enigma deepens. At Baalbek, in the Bekaa Valley, the ruins of a Roman temple complex stand atop something older and stranger. The trilithon, 3 stone blocks each weighing around 800 tons, fitted into a platform of even larger megaliths. Nearby lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at over 1,000 tons, one of the largest stones ever quarried. Modern cranes would struggle to move it, yet somehow it was cut, shaped, and prepared in antiquity. Roman builders used the site for their grand temple of Jupiter, but the foundation predates them. Who placed those stones? And why? The blocks are not only massive, but precise, fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot pass between them. Mainstream archaeology suggests they were part of a gigantic platform, but the question of how they were moved remains unanswered. Legends claim that giants built Baalbek, or that it was a landing pad for the gods, its vast stones anchoring celestial visitors. Whatever the truth, Baalbek stands as a riddle carved in stone, a challenge to our assumptions about the limits of ancient technology. Even older is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, buried for thousands of years before its discovery in the 1990s. Dating to around 9600 BCE, it is more than twice as old as Stonehenge or the pyramids. Here, enormous T-shaped pillars rise in circles, some engraved with animals, lions, scorpions, vultures, symbols etched into the dawn of history. The pillars weigh up to 20 tons, yet were quarried, moved, and erected by hunter-gatherers long before the invention of writing, metal tools, or even agriculture as we know it. Göbekli Tepe rewrote history, proving that monumental architecture preceded farming, that complex society may have arisen not from agriculture, but from shared ritual and vision. But what vision compelled nomadic peoples to gather, to quarry and shape vast stones, to build circles aligned with the stars? Some scholars see it as the world's first temple, a place where myth was enacted in stone. Others wonder if it preserves memory of an even older tradition, a knowledge carried from a civilization now lost. The alignment of these megaliths suggests something more than mere ritual. At Stonehenge, the solstice sun is captured with precision. At Göbekli Tepe, carvings appear to encode constellations, perhaps marking events in the sky, At Baalbek, the platform faces the sky with monumental scale, as though designed not for men, but for beings who moved through the heavens. Across the globe, megalithic sites are tied to the stars, as though their builders sought not only to honor the heavens, but to connect with them. Why this obsession with the sky? Did they believe their gods dwelt among the stars, watching, guiding, demanding monuments as messages or anchors? Or did they build them as markers, maps, or even machines, devices to bridge Earth and cosmos? The motif of giants returns here. In folklore, megaliths are often attributed to giants. The stones of Stonehenge were said to have been placed by Merlin with the help of giants. The Cyclopean walls of Mycenae were believed to have been built by one-eyed giants. In Lebanon, locals called Baalbek the fortress of the giants. To later generations, the idea that ordinary humans could have built such structures seemed absurd. They reached instead for memory. Giants must have done it. Perhaps these are only myths, or perhaps they preserve a dim recollection of beings larger, stronger, or more advanced, whose works we inherited but could not replicate. What is striking is the global nature of these monuments. From Easter Island's Moai to the dolmens of Korea, from Karnak in France to Nan Madol in Micronesia, the world is littered with stones so large and so carefully arranged that they demand explanation. They are separated by oceans, yet they share patterns, alignment with stars, massive scale, precision beyond necessity. It is as if humanity, at some early stage, carried a single tradition: to build with stone, to align with the heavens, to leave messages that would endure for millennia. Was this a universal impulse, born of reverence for the sky? Or was it a shared inheritance from a forgotten age, a knowledge passed down from an earlier civilization, erased by catastrophe, yet remembered in stone? Standing before these megaliths, one feels both wonder and humility. They are reminders that our ancestors were not primitive savages, but visionaries capable of feats we still struggle to explain. They whisper that history is deeper than we know, that the line between myth and memory is porous. Whether built by gods, giants, or determined humans, they remain as testaments to a mystery too vast to ignore. Perhaps they were temples, calendars, or monuments to the dead. Or perhaps they were more machines of stone, designed to anchor energy, to signal the heavens, to preserve memory through cataclysm. Whatever their purpose, they succeeded in one thing: they endure. Long after empires rise and fall, long after languages vanish, the megaliths remain, massive and silent, speaking in the language of stone. From Mesopotamia's Apkallu to Egypt's Zep Tepi, from India's Vimanas to the Maya's hero twins, from the Hopi's star people to the Dogon's Nommo, the pattern has repeated. Humanity remembers teachers, giants, gods, and cataclysms. We find their traces in myths that span oceans, in megaliths too heavy to forget, in alignments that turn stone into calendars of the sky. Again and again, stories whisper of ages before ours, ages destroyed by flood, by fire, by rebellion, by cycles too vast for ordinary history. As we have wandered through these memories, one question has lingered. Are we truly the first great civilization on this earth, or only the latest in a cycle of rise and fall? The evidence is tantalizing. Myths that mirror each other across continents, ruins that defy conventional explanations, traditions of beings who descended from the heavens, gave knowledge, and withdrew. The great flood myths are nearly universal. speaking of a reset that swept away all but fragments of what came before. The Book of Enoch presents the flood as deliberate erasure, a cleansing of forbidden unions and dangerous knowledge. The Popol Vuh frames creation itself as a series of failed experiments before a final, enduring design. The Hopi prophecy tells us we are in the fourth world, awaiting the fifth. Hindu cosmology divides time into yugas, vast ages that decline into darkness before renewal. These are not isolated stories. They are pieces of a larger pattern, fragments of a memory humanity cannot entirely erase. And yet, modern history insists we are the first. Archaeology traces civilization back only a few thousand years. Sumer, around 3000 BCE, Egypt a little later, the Indus Valley, the Shang dynasty. But what of Göbekli Tepe, built 12,000 years ago, aligned with constellations, its pillars carved with animals and symbols? What of the Sphinx, whose erosion may hint at reigns older than dynasties? What of submerged ruins off the coasts of India and Japan, where cities lie beneath the sea, drowned when glaciers melted? Each anomaly suggests that the story of civilization might stretch back further than we think, that our timeline may be only a fragment of a much older cycle. If humanity has risen before, what became of those earlier worlds? Perhaps they fell victim to their own hubris, as myths warn. The Watchers gave forbidden knowledge, and it destroyed their children. The Mahabharata speaks of weapons that scorched cities and poisoned lands. The flood myths tell of arrogance, noise, corruption, inviting divine wrath. Perhaps our predecessors reached heights of power we cannot imagine, then collapsed, leaving only scattered ruins, their memory refracted through myth. Or perhaps they were erased by forces beyond control. Comets, earthquakes, shifts in climate. The Younger Dryas, around 12,000 years ago, saw sudden cooling and flooding, events that could have obliterated civilizations on coastal plains now lost beneath the sea. To survivors, such trauma would have been remembered as the wrath of gods, as floods and fire. But if this is true, if there were civilizations before, why so little evidence? Stone endures, but metals rust, wood decays, cities crumble. After only a few thousand years, forests reclaim concrete, deserts bury monuments, seas erode coastlines. Our own world, if destroyed, would vanish swiftly, leaving only traces. Skyscrapers would collapse, plastic would decay in centuries, satellites would fall from the sky. 10,000 years from now, perhaps only a few scattered ruins would remain, and future peoples might wonder if we ever existed at all. If this is true for us, how much more so for those before? Perhaps Göbekli Tepe and Baalbek, Stonehenge and the Nazca lines are exactly such traces, remnants of worlds erased, fragments that survived the cleansing of time. The myths tell us something else, that the gods, the Watchers, the Star People promised to return. Quetzalcoatl vowed to come back. The Hopi await the blue star Kachina. Christians look for the second coming. The Norse foresaw Ragnarok followed by renewal. Whether literal or symbolic, these prophecies keep alive the memory that cycles do not end with destruction. They begin again. Humanity rises, falls, and rises again. Perhaps we are not the first, and perhaps we will not be the last. What then does this mean for us? If we are one more civilization in a cycle, then our achievements, our skyscrapers, our machines, our knowledge of stars are both miraculous and fragile. We may believe ourselves unique, the pinnacle of progress, but the myths warn against arrogance. They remind us that others may have come before, reached high, and fallen. They remind us that catastrophe can sweep away certainty in an instant. And they remind us that survival depends not only on power, but on balance. Balance with the earth, with the sky, with the forces we cannot control. Perhaps the myths are only stories, echoes of fears and dreams. Perhaps the megaliths are only monuments of determined humans. Perhaps there were no giants, no gods, no forgotten civilizations. Yet even if so, the questions remain. Why do we tell the same stories across continents? Why do ruins from distant lands align with the same stars? Why does every culture remember floods, teachers from the sky, and cycles of destruction? There is a resonance here that refuses to die, a memory older than writing, older than history, a whisper that says, remember. Standing today in the shadow of the pyramids, on the plain of Nazca, or before the carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe, we are confronted with silence. The stones do not explain themselves. They ask us to wonder. Were we the first, or are we only the latest in a long chain of civilizations, each rising from the ashes of the one before? Will ours endure, or will it too be swept away, remembered only in myth? The answer may never come. Or perhaps it already has, hidden in stories we dismiss as legend, in ruins we cannot explain, in stars that our ancestors insisted were home. For now, the mystery remains. Humanity walks on the surface of a history deeper than we know, our feet on soil that has seen worlds rise and vanish. The myths are not proof, but they are invitations to look again, to listen, to imagine that the past may be stranger, vaster, and more fragile than we believe. And so, as we close this journey through gods, giants, floods, and forgotten stones, we end not with certainty, but with a question. Are we the first, or only the most recent chapter in an ancient cycle? Perhaps the truth lies not in answers, but in remembering the question, in never letting the silence of the stones lull us into forgetting. For the myths insist, with quiet persistence, that history is never as simple as we think,